Today, we're getting into a story that's, well, literally older than writing itself. We're talking about Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk.
Hmm.
And specifically, we're looking at this claim from back in 2003, a potential discovery that should have been absolutely massive news, finding his sealed tomb.
Right. And the thing is, this site, it's been effectively locked down for more than 20 years now. Just silence, wrapped up in politics, red tape, and honestly, some really wild rumors.
Exactly. So for you listening, if you like trying to sort out the media hype from what might actually be happening on the ground, this Gilgamesh tomb story is fascinating.
It really is a perfect storm. So our goal here is to unpack what we actually know from the sources, the facts behind the initial discovery claim, the perfectly valid reasons why digging stopped, but also these more sensational, almost fear-driven stories that have kept it untouched.
Yeah, we're peeling back the layers, the history, the archaeology, the fear, the politics, all crashing together in the Iraqi desert. Let's dive in. Hashtag I, the king, the epic, and the geographical clue. Okay, first things first. Gilgamesh himself.
Yeah.
He's the hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is like the oldest piece of literature we have. Full stop.
Right. And the epic paints him as this larger-than-life figure, two-thirds god, one-third human, driven by this intense fear of death.
He goes on this whole quest for immortality, doesn't he?
It does, and, spoiler alert, he fails.
Right.
But what he learns, supposedly, is that true immortality comes from, well, achievements, like building the incredible walls around his city, Uruk. That's his legacy.
Yeah, it's tempting to just file him under myth, right? Given the whole two-thirds God thing.
Well, yeah, but most historians actually lean towards thinking a real Gilgamesh did exist, a powerful king ruling Uruk back in Sumer, which is modern-day Iraq, probably around 2700 BC.
So a real historical core, even if the epic adds layers of myth?
Exactly. And crucially, even within those myths, particularly in other Sumerian texts like the Death of Gilgamesh, there's a very specific detail about his burial. A geographical clue.
And this is the really interesting part, the burial itself.
Yes. The texts say his tomb wasn't just on land, it was built beneath the Euphrates River.
Wow. How would that even work?
Well, according to the story, it was a huge undertaking. They supposedly diverted the entire river temporarily.
Seriously.
That's the legend. Divert the water, build the tomb complex in the dry riverbed, and then let the river flow back over it, sealing it completely underwater and silt.
Okay, I have to ask, though. Trying to find a tomb based on a description from a poem, a myth,
Yeah.
that sounds, well, almost impossible from an archaeological standpoint.
Normally, yes, it would be. Except for one key thing. The Euphrates River hasn't stayed put.
Oh.
Over 4,000 years, its course has shifted a lot. It's snaked across the landscape. So the place where the river used to flow, where Gilgamesh was supposedly buried, well, large parts of that ancient riverbed are now dry land.
Okay, so that geographical change suddenly makes the myth potentially searchable.
Precisely. It opened the door for modern techniques to actually test that ancient description. #tag2, the discovery claim, 2003.
Right, so fast forward millennia, we're in the early 2000s, so there's a German-led team, specifically involving a geophysicist, Jörg Fassbinder. They're working near the ruins of Uruk.
Mm-hmm. And crucially, as you said earlier, they weren't digging. They were using remote sensing.
Technology like magnetometers.
Yeah.
Ground-penetrating radar.
Exactly that. This tech is great for archaeology because it lets you see underground without disturbing anything. It detects anomalies. For instance, ancient mud bricks, like those used in Sumerian buildings, have a different magnetic signature than the river sediment around them.
So you can basically map buried structures.
You can. And the results were, well, pretty startling. They found evidence of a large buried structure right in the area of the old Euphrates riverbed.
I love
Estimates put it around the size of a football field. It looked like a complex. It had features that suggested corridors, maybe rooms, even a potential central chamber. It fit the description of a major burial structure, maybe even royal.
And this is where the media storm starts, right? It's April 2003.
Oh, yeah. The BBC runs with the headline, "Gilgamesh Tomb Believed Found." And it just explodes globally. Instant sensation.
But there was a catch, wasn't there? Something lost in translation. Tell us about that, because it's key to how this whole thing ballooned.
It really is. Fassbinder himself later tried to pump the brakes a bit. He explained that when speaking in German, he'd used a specific grammatical form, the conjunctive.
Okay. What does that mean in practice?
It basically implies possibility or resemblance. It translates more like it could be the tomb, or it looks like the site described rather than a definite statement. It conveys academic caution.
Ah, so not we found it, but This looks intriguingly like it might be it.
Exactly. But that subtlety, that crucial maybe, it vanished in the English reporting. It became this declarative, almost certain statement, believed found, a tiny linguistic shift, but it created this huge runaway narrative.
So they had this intriguing data, maybe a tune, maybe just a large structure they reported to the Iraqi authorities. But the timing, April 2003.
The timing couldn't have been worse. The U.S.-led invasion of Iraq had begun just the month before, in March.
Chaos.
Absolute chaos. The country was immediately plunged into instability, violence, the breakdown of government. Any plans for a careful follow-up excavation immediately off the table. It was paused indefinitely.
And that pause has basically lasted ever since.
Pretty much. 20 years and counting. No official published dig has ever followed up on that radar data. The whole thing just got frozen in time, right at the peak of public interest.
Which brings us to the big question. Why is it still sealed off? When you look into it, there seem to be two very different sets of reasons pulling against each other.
That's a good way to put it. You've got the practical, logistical, perfectly understandable reasons on one side, and then you have something else, the more mythic, fear-based reasons on the other.
Let's start with the practical stuff, the non-conspiracy reasons.
Okay. Well, first off, the sheer logistics are daunting. Southern Iraq, the area around Uruk, has faced ongoing instability pretty much constantly since 2003. War, insurgency, political complexity.
So just getting a team in there safely would be a nightmare.
A huge nightmare. You'd need massive international funding. You'd need serious security, probably armed escorts. You'd need permits from various levels of Iraqi government, which can be challenging to navigate. It's a bureaucratic and security minefield.
Makes sense. What else?
Then there's the academic caution that Fassbender originally hinted at. Remember, remote sensing only shows shapes, anomalies, that football field-sized structure. It could be a tomb. It could also be a different kind of building or even a natural geological formation that just happens to look regular.
Right. You don't want to launch a massive, expensive dig based on a maybe.
Exactly. You risk wasting huge resources. And worse, you risk damaging something ancient and important that has nothing to do with Gilgamesh. Archaeologists have to be sure, or as sure as possible, before they break ground.
And there are ethical considerations too, I imagine.
Yeah.
Preservation.
Absolutely. Think about it. If there are organic remains in there, wood, cloth, maybe even a body that have been sealed in a stable environment for nearly 5,000 years, exposing them suddenly to air, moisture, temperature changes, they can literally disintegrate in hours.
Wow.
Sometimes the most responsible act of preservation is to leave something undisturbed until you're absolutely certain you can handle it correctly. Plus, you have local cultural and religious sensitivities. These aren't just archaeological sites. For some people, they're sacred ground.
Okay, so those are solid, real-world reasons for caution. Instability, cost, scientific uncertainty, preservation, ethics. But then there's the other side, the whispers, the local fears, the curse narrative.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really interesting. Now, Mesopotamian traditions didn't really have the kind of formal inscribed curses like you see on, say, Egyptian tomb.
Yeah, disturb this tomb and face the wrath of Anubis type stuff.
Not quite like that, but there was definitely a strong belief in protective magic, in powerful incantations placed around the graves of important figures, especially kings. The idea was to invoke divine punishment, disease, madness, chaos on anyone foolish enough to desecrate the site.
And this isn't just ancient history. These beliefs persist.
Very much so, at least locally. There are these persistent, though unconfirmed, stories from people in the area. Tales about animals acting strangely near the site, refusing to graze there, dogs howling incessantly, herders deliberately taking their flocks on long detours to avoid that specific patch of land identified by the radar.
Wow. So a real sense of unease around the location.
Definitely. And it goes beyond unease. There are darker rumors too, again, totally unverified, but stories circulate about small teams, maybe survey crews, maybe looters. It's unclear trying to set up equipment near the anomaly in the mid-2000s. And
supposedly, they were struck down by sudden, violent illness, intense nausea, high fevers, forcing them to flee the site immediately. Now, could it be coincidence, environmental factors, mass hysteria? Maybe. But the effect is real. It adds to this aura of dread, this feeling that the place is somehow protected or dangerous.
This fear narrative really kicks the door open for claims that go way beyond archaeology, doesn't it? The official silence created a vacuum.
It absolutely did. And into that vacuum rushed these extraordinary stories, suggesting the site wasn't left entirely alone. There are claims, often attributed to anonymous insiders or researchers like Graham Hancock who allege footage exists, that the site was partially accessed, maybe between 2004 and 2006.
Accessed how? Like a secret dig.
That's the allegation, that a temporary breach was made, and according to these accounts, they found a sealed inner chamber. Inside, supposedly, was a huge stone sarcophagus covered in cuneiform writing.
Okay, that sounds like something out of a movie. It gets better. The inscriptions allegedly carried a stark warning. Something along the lines of, "Leave this vessel sealed, don't open it until the stars are aligned again."
Whoa! Okay, that's pure mythological dread right there. The stars are aligned.
Classic trope, isn't it? And apparently this warning, combined perhaps with other weird occurrences, was enough. Local workers allegedly refused point blank to go any further. There are even darker rumors that one person involved died mysteriously within weeks.
This is escalating quickly. But the claims about what might actually be inside the sarcophagus, that's where it goes completely off the rails, right?
That's where it enters the realm of, let's say, fringe speculation. The most explosive claim, supposedly coming from someone who translated the cuneiform, was that the text didn't just describe Gilgamesh as a king, it described him as a giant.
A giant? How giant?
The figures thrown around are usually 8 or 9 feet tall, and not just tall, but somehow preserved. The description allegedly mentioned him being held in waiting, with divine breath suspended in stone, and a heart that does not decay.
Okay, so we're talking preserved body, potential genetic anomaly, maybe even hinting at things like the Nephilim from other traditions.
That's exactly where the speculation went. A massive, perfectly preserved, possibly non-human or hybrid being waiting in a tomb.
And it doesn't stop at biology, does it? There are technology theories too.
Nope. Other claims suggest the sarcophagus itself is active, emitting low-frequency vibrations constantly, or generating such a strong magnetic field that electronic instruments fail near it.
Suggesting it contains
Objects of unknown origin, advanced ancient technology. Some theories even propose the tomb isn't a tomb at all, but a containment device, a lock, designed to keep some kind of ancient chaos, or maybe angry deities like Enlil or Nergal, safely bottled up.
unleashing chaos if opened. Okay, now let's bring in the political context again. The timing. Discovery announced April 2003, invasion March 2003.
That timing is the fuel for the biggest conspiracy theory surrounding the site.
Which is
That the U.S. invasion wasn't just about regime change or WMDs. That a secondary, perhaps primary objective was to secure this site and whatever it contained, be it a giant or ancient tech before anyone else could. A high-tech tomb raid under the cover of war.
Is there any evidence for that beyond the timing?
Well, you have persistent local accounts, again, difficult to verify, but stories spread that U.S. military units moved in very quickly, secured the specific area around the Uruk anomaly, and even set up a base nearby, sometimes called Camp Babylon, essentially right on top of the potential big site.
And rumors of nighttime activity.
Yes, whispers of digging, of large, heavily guarded, covered objects being removed under cover of darkness. Now, we have to be careful, this is anecdotal, but we do know for a fact, it's documented, that during the chaos of the invasion, Iraq's National Museum in Baghdad was looted, devastatingly looted, and one of the high-profile items stolen then, the Gilgamesh Dream Tablet.
Ah, so a confirmed instance of a priceless Gilgamesh artifact being targeted during that exact period.
Exactly. That tablet was eventually recovered by U.S. authorities years later and returned to Iraq in 2021. But the fact that Gilgamesh artifacts were known targets lends a certain plausibility, or at least resonance, to the local fears that the tomb site itself was also a high-priority objective for someone during the invasion's fog of war. That information vacuum was just perfectly primed for these kinds of extraordinary stories to take root. Hashtag tag V, the unresolved visual anomaly.
Okay, so the site remains sealed, the rumors swirl. But the story doesn't completely end there, does it? There's a more recent kind of intriguing wrinkle involving satellite imagery.
That's right. This comes from Dr. Kelvin Long, who published observations fairly recently in 2025. He noticed something odd in satellite photos of the Uruk area.
What did he see?
A geoglyph. A large pattern marked on the ground, visible in images going back decades, even to 1984 apparently.
A pattern? What kind of pattern?
And this is the kicker. Long claims the marking looks remarkably like the classic Assyrian image of Gilgamesh himself, the one where he's holding a lion and a snake, right near the location of Fassbinder's anomaly.
Wait, a giant Gilgamesh symbol on the ground, visible from space, right near the supposed tomb. But wouldn't that have washed away? I thought Fassbinder said.
Exactly, that's the puzzle. Fassbinder, the original geophysicist, was quite clear. He argued that the ground there is river floodplain sediment. Any surface marking like a geoglyph should be obliterated by seasonal rains and floods within a year, maybe two. It shouldn't survive for decades.
So how could this image persist since the 80s?
Well, Dr. Long has a counter theory. He suggests the geoglyph isn't just on the surface. His idea is that it's a manifestation, as he put it, of a deeper, buried stone structure.
Like the pattern is built underneath, and as the topsoil erodes, the pattern keeps showing through. It sort of renews itself.
That's the hypothesis, that this massive structure, perhaps part of the tomb complex itself, is acting like a template, subtly shaping the surface above it over long periods. If true, it would imply the location wasn't just chosen, it was deliberately and enduringly marked.
Which just adds another layer of mystery, suggesting maybe there is something significant buried there, something meant to be found. Or perhaps avoided. Hashtag outro. So here we are, the supposed tomb of Gilgamesh. It really is this perfect convergence, isn't it? Ancient history, modern conflict, scientific caution, political gridlock, and this deep, resonant mythological fear, all keeping it sealed.
Absolutely. That silence from official channels, ever since 2003, it just created this void. And human nature, well, it abhors a vacuum. So the void got filled with these incredible stories, these anxieties, these possibilities. It ensures the mystery continues, and maybe the hesitation, too.
It really makes you wonder, what if those ancient texts, the ones describing the river burial, weren't just stories? What if they were accurate? And what if the tomb wasn't just a memorial for a dead king? What if it really was meant as a lock?
That's the unsettling question, isn't it?
We know the original Gilgamesh, the one in the epic, failed to find eternal life. His legacy was fame, his story. But if this tomb, this sealed place, does hold something extraordinary, a preserved giant, lost knowledge, ancient tech, what would discovering it really mean for us? Would our legacy be the fame of finding it? Or would it be? Well, the consequences of opening a door that maybe, just maybe, was sealed for a very good reason.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, maybe the biggest, most frustrating cold case in all of history. The hunt for the body and the tomb of Alexander the Great.
It really is the enduring mystery for archaeology, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, think about Alexander died young, 32, back in 323 BCE in Babylon.
Yeah.
And his tomb, for centuries, it wasn't just a tomb, it was a massive landmark, a place emperors like Caesar, Augustus, they had to visit, a cult site.
And yet, gone.
Yeah.
Vanished. Despite all that fame, we have no idea where his body is now. It's been lost for, nearly 2,000 years.
It's astounding, and finding it, well, that's the Holy Grail, like you said. That body, initially in this huge golden sarcophagus, it was the symbol of power, of legitimacy for whoever came after him.
Which explains why there's been so much effort to find it. You mentioned over 140 formal searches.
At least, yeah, just since the 1800s.
Yeah.
Driven by this huge hole in the historical record.
Okay, so our mission today. Let's track this king's corpse. Let's look at the history, the different burial spots, and then dive into some of the, frankly, wild modern theories about where it might actually be.
It starts right after his death in Babylon. Pure chaos and politics. His generals, the Diadochi, they sort of agreed, okay, send the body back home, back to Aegean Macedonia, the traditional place for kings.
But nobody trusted each other.
Not a chance.
Yeah.
And Ptolemy Soter, who's running Egypt, he was the shrewdest. He made the first big move.
The hijacking.
Exactly. 321 BCE. This incredible funeral cart, Diodorus, describes it like a temple on wheels, massive, it's heading through Syria.
And Ptolemy just intercepts it.
Bribes the guards, grabs the body, diverts the whole procession south to Egypt. A total power play.
Yeah.
He was basically saying, Alexander's legacy, it's mine now. It's here in Egypt.
And the first place he takes the body isn't Alexandria, because Alexandria wasn't quite ready yet.
All right, crucial point. The first stop was Memphis. Still the capital then. And we know this from good sources, Pausanias, the Paharian Marble Chronicle. They confirm he was buried in Memphis first.
For how long?
About 4 decades, give or take, roughly until 280 BCE.
Okay, and for that first Memphis tomb, there's this interesting theory connecting it to the previous pharaoh, Nectanebo II.
Yeah, it's quite neat, actually. Nectanebo, the last native pharaoh, he'd fled Egypt way back in 341 BCE.
leaving his sarcophagus empty.
Precisely.
Mm.
So the theory goes, Ptolemy used Nectanebo's abandoned temple complex near the Serapeum at Saqqara as the initial tomb, and he likely popped Alexander right into Nectanebo's vacant sarcophagus.
Practical, but also politically brilliant.
Oh, absolutely. It's probably how the whole Alexander romance story started. You know, that cycle of legends claiming Nectanebo II was secretly Alexander's father.
Ah, so it links Alexander to the old pharaohs, makes the Greek rule seem legitimate to the Egyptians.
Exactly. Instant propaganda win for Ptolemy's new dynasty.
So Alexander rests in Memphis for about 40 years, establishing that link. Then he's moved.
Yes, moved to the city he founded, Alexandria.
Yeah.
Ptolemy II started the process, but it was his successor, Ptolemy V Philopator, who built the final, really grand mausoleum.
The Soma.
The Soma, yeah, Greek for body, or sometimes called the Thema, the grave sign. This wasn't just for Alexander. The Ptolemaic royals were buried there too. It became the dynasty's central cult site.
And its fame just grew and grew even after the Ptolemies were gone.
For centuries, it was like a required stop for Roman emperors. They wanted that connection to Alexander's greatness.
We have records of who visited.
Oh, yeah. Julius Caesar, 48 BCE. Cleopatra famously stripped gold from the tomb to fund her war effort.
Desperate times.
Very. And then Augustus, after he defeated Antony and Cleopatra, he visits the mummy, puts a golden crown on its head,
Wow.
and then apparently refuses to even look at the other Ptolemaic rulers buried nearby. Said he came to see a king, not corpses. Shows you Alexander's unique status.
Incredible, but the tomb itself didn't stay quite so golden.
No, the later Ptolemies hit hard times. Ptolemy X, around 89 BCE, he actually melted down the original gold sarcophagus.
What? Why?
Needed the cash, presumably. Replaced it with one made of crystal, maybe glass. Still a spectacle. The body was still on display, but diminished.
And the last time we know for sure someone saw the mummy.
The last definite mention is just before 390 CE. After that, silence.
Which is where the mystery really deepens. It seems unlikely something so important would just get lost or forgotten.
The timing is the key. Think about what's happening around 390 CE. The Roman Empire is officially Christian.
The Theodosian decrees.
Exactly. Issued between 389 and 391 CE. These decrees order the closure and offer the destruction of pagan temples and cult sites across the empire. And Alexander's tomb. It was a major pagan cult center.
So it wasn't an earthquake or a fire. It was likely deliberately suppressed.
That's the most probable explanation. St. Cyril of Alexandria even wrote about treasures being stripped from Alexander's cult places. By 400 CE, St. John Chrysostom could write something pretty shocking. His tomb, even his own people know not.
Wow. So it was actively erased from public knowledge within a single generation.
Seems that way. The physical location, the body itself, just hidden away or possibly destroyed as part of this anti-pagan push.
Okay, that brings us to the modern search and the big problem. Alexandria today. It's a huge, bustling city. How on earth do you excavate something like that?
It's an archaeologist's nightmare. The general consensus puts the Soma somewhere near the intersection of modern El Araya and Nebi Daniel roads, the heart of the ancient royal quarter. But digging there, almost impossible with the modern city built right on top.
Well, you know people have tried a lot.
Over 100 documented attempts in that area alone. And people are still looking.
We should mention Calliope Limnius Papacosta's work.
Absolutely. She's doing incredible work excavating deep beneath the Shalat Gardens right in that royal quarter area. Found amazing Hellenistic artifacts, even a beautiful marble statue head of Alexander.
But not the tomb itself.
Not the Soma, no. Not yet, anyway. It remains elusive.
And then there are always other theories, other locations that pop up.
Always. There's local legend pointing to the Nabi Daniel Mosque, but most scholars are pretty skeptical about that specific spot being the Soma.
What about the Kaista tomb in Greece? That caused a stir.
Huge excitement, yeah. That massive tomb at Amphipolis. For a while, people hoped it was Alexander. But the evidence inside points much more strongly towards Hephaestion, his closest companion.
And Siwa Oasis. Because of the oracle.
People mention it because he was declared son of Zeus Ammon there, but honestly, there's no real evidence linking his burial to Siwa. It's more wishful thinking.
Okay, but let's circle back to Memphis. Because the archaeology there seems to be reinforcing that Nectanebo II connection in a really interesting way.
This is where it gets compelling. Remember that temple compound of Nectanebo II near the Serapeum at Saqqara?
Yeah, where the first tomb might have been.
Archaeologists found something amazing guarding the entrance to that very compound. A semicircle of life-size Greek statues. Homer, Pindar, Plato. Greek sages and poets.
Greek statues guarding an Egyptian pharaoh's temple.
And crucially, they date specifically to the reign of Ptolemy the Food, the guy who hijacked the body.
Huh. So why would Ptolemy put Greek statues there unless...
Unless that compound was holding something incredibly important to him and his Greek dynasty. It strongly suggests that Nectanebo's temple was where Alexander was first buried in Memphis.
Which leads us neatly into maybe the most controversial but strangely well-supported theory, the idea that Alexander got rebranded.
The St. Mark theory. It's radical, but the pieces fit together surprisingly well. The core idea, around 392 CE, right when the anti-pagan decrees were at their height.
And Alexander's tomb vanishes.
The body of St. Mark the Evangelist suddenly appears in Alexandria, in the very area where Alexander's shrine was located. The theory suggests Alexander's body was secretly relabeled as St. Mark to save it from destruction.
That seems incredibly risky, passing off a pagan king as a major Christian saint.
Preservation. The body itself, the physical remains, were seen as immensely powerful, almost magical, too important to let vanish. By calling him St. Mark, protectors could smuggle him, essentially, into the safety of the new Christian establishment.
Protected by the very people who might have otherwise destroyed him.
Precisely.
And then centuries fly by, and this body, now known as St. Mark, ends up in Venice.
The famous story from 828 AD, Venetian merchants wanting a powerful patron saint for their rising city, they sail to Alexandria and liberate the remains of St. Mark.
Steal them, basically.
Pretty much. Took them back to Venice, built the magnificent St. Mark's Basilica to house them. The theory is they didn't steal St. Mark, they stole Alexander, who was already being passed off as St. Mark by the Alexandrian Church.
Okay, circumstantial timing is one thing, but you mentioned physical evidence linking Memphis, Alexandria, and Venice.
This is the kicker, the aha moment. Two key objects. First, that empty sarcophagus of Nectanebo II, the one Ptolemy likely used first. It's now in the British Museum.
Okay.
Second, there's a chunk of carved stone, a piece of tomb decoration, found embedded in the foundations of St. Mark's Basilica in Venice back in the 1960s. It's called the Star Shield Block.
And what's special about it?
It's clearly Macedonian. It has carvings of a Macedonian star or shield, and maybe a sarissa, the long pike. And here's the thing. Its dimensions, its style, they are a perfect fit for the Nectanebo sarcophagus in London.
Wait, so a piece of the casing from the first tomb in Memphis somehow ended up in the foundation of the church in Venice.
That's the implication. The theory suggests Ptolemy put a custom Macedonian casing around the Nectanebo sarcophagus in Memphis. Moved the whole thing body, sarcophagus casing to the Soma in Alexandria. Then, almost 1,000 years later, when the body, now called St. Mark, was taken to Venice, this fragment of the original Macedonian casing somehow went with it.
That's incredibly specific. Has this been verified?
Well, the fit is exact, and it's significant enough that even the British Museum has softened its stance. They used to flat-out deny any link between the Nectanebo sarcophagus and Alexander. Now their online notes are much more cautious.
So if this chain of evidence holds, what's the final step to prove that the bones under the altar in Venice are Alexander's?
Forensics. Simple as that, in theory. We know Alexander suffered specific, serious injuries that healed. An arrow wound in the lower leg from Afghanistan, another arrow wound, this one to the chest, in India.
And if the skeleton in Venice shows those healed injuries...
Then it's Alexander. Case closed.
Yeah.
The physical proof would be undeniable.
But it hasn't been examined.
No. The Catholic Church authorities in Venice have consistently refused requests to allow forensic anthropologists access to the remains venerated as St. Mark.
Wow. Okay, so that's one incredibly detailed, evidence-backed, but currently blocked theory. And as if that weren't enough, there's one more, even more radical idea out there.
Yes, the one that throws established Egyptian chronology completely out the window. The idea that Alexander the Great is Tutankhamun.
You mean the mummy found by Howard Carter in KB62, King Tut?
That's the one. This theory proposes that the mummy we call Tutankhamun is actually Alexander, and that the standard timeline placing Tutankhamun 1,000 years earlier is fundamentally wrong.
Okay, hold on. 1,000-year gap. How does anyone even start to justify that?
It starts with the mummy itself. Officially, Tut died aged 18 or 19. But modern scans, they suggest an age closer to the mid-20s, maybe even up to 27. And some pathologists argue the bone development could even fit someone up to 33.
Alexander's age at death, 32 or 33.
Exactly. Plus the teeth. The KB62 mummy has fully erupted wisdom teeth showing somewhere. That's typical for an adult in their late 20s or early 30s, not really for a teenager.
And the timeline itself, why would it be off by a neat 1,000 years?
Proponents argue the established chronology relies heavily on sources like Manetho's king lists, which are known to be incomplete and sometimes politically motivated. They find the exact 1,000-year discrepancy suspicious, maybe a later error, or even an intentional fudge to separate Alexander from the pharaonic sequence.
Then there's the DNA evidence, which caused a stir a while back, the haplogroup.
Right, haplogroup R1b1a2. It's a genetic marker passed down the male line. It turned up in the KV62 mummy's DNA results.
And that's unusual for Egypt.
Statistically, yes. It's much more common in Western Europe, including ancient Macedonia. Plus, the mummy's height, around 167, 170 centimeters, is taller than the average for Egyptian pharaohs of Tut's supposed era, but fits estimates for Alexander.
Okay, what about the treasures? The famous mask, the chariots, everything found in that spectacular tomb. They look Egyptian.
They look Egyptian, but the details raise questions. For example, the tomb contained iron objects, like that famous dagger. Iron was almost impossibly rare and valuable in Bronze Age Egypt.
But common in Alexander's time, the 4th century BCE.
Correct. And techniques like the chasing on the gold mask, the design of the chariots, experts have pointed out strong parallels to Macedonian and Persian styles from the 4th century BCE, even styles seen on Alexander's own coins.
So the argument is, KB62 wasn't Tut's tomb originally. It was a secret, hidden burial for Alexander made to look Egyptian.
That's the core idea. A way to bury Alexander in Thebes, the sacred heartland of Egypt, near Karnak to Egyptianize him, make him one with Osiris, maybe before the more public political tomb, the Soma, was established later in Alexandria.
Any textual hints for that?
Some proponents point to certain Arab chronicles that occasionally call Alexander al-Karnaki, linking him to Karnak Thebes, or mention him being taken to the southern lands, which means Upper Egypt, where Thebes is.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, the search for Alexander's body takes us on this wild journey. From Memphis and a possibly repurposed pharaoh's tomb.
To the Grand Soma in Alexandria, visited by emperors then suppressed.
To a theory involving saints and Venetian merchants, with physical evidence potentially linking a London sarcophagus to a Venice church foundation.
And finally, to this completely alternative history, suggesting he's been hiding in plain sight in the most famous Egyptian tomb of all time.
It's an incredible amount of conflicting, yet sometimes compelling evidence.
Absolutely. And while the body is still officially lost, the ongoing search, these competing theories, they keep the discussion alive. They force us, really, to re-examine things we thought we knew about Egyptian chronology, about artifact dating, about how history gets written and rewritten.
Which leads to a final thought. If the St. Mark theory is correct, and the only thing preventing confirmation is refusal to examine the bones in Venice, what does that say? What does the continued loss of Alexander tell us? Maybe less about the past and more about our own time, our institutions, and what we choose to prioritize or protect.
It's a powerful question. Is reverence for tradition sometimes an obstacle to discovering historical truth?
Something for you to think about. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive. Welcome to the deep dive. Put away your calculators, well, maybe just for a moment, because today we are looking at numbers in a slightly different light. Not just as tools for counting, but as things holding real mystical power across history. We are diving into this kind of universal language that cultures have used for, well, millennia, really, trying to decode destiny, the cosmos, spiritual truths. Our mission today is to navigate the surprising similarities, but also the profound differences between these ancient traditions. We're talking Babylonians, Pythagoreans, the Maya. We'll compare how they found meaning in digits, and then we'll bring it right up to the modern day and explore what, scientific analysis actually says about all this.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how our view of numbers has shifted so dramatically. I mean, today they're just quantities, right? Purely functional. But for thousands of years, as you see in the sources, numbers were almost, entities. The ancient Egyptians even called them neteru. They saw them as these energetic formative principles that literally shaped reality. And, to get into modern numerology practice, you really have to understand this fundamental split. There are basically two main systems used for assigning numerical values to letters. You've got the Chaldean method and the Pythagorean method. They're essentially two different ways of charting a path to meaning, if you like.
Okay, right. Let's unpack that. We've got sources here that let us compare them directly. These are the two main systems people use today to figure out a name number or a destiny number.
Exactly. So we start with Chaldean. This one's older. Its roots are in ancient Babylon, what's now Iraq. And because it's so ancient, it stays really deeply connected to Astrology, celestial influences, that kind of predetermined fate idea.
And the way they map letters isn't straightforward alphabetical order, is it? It's based on sound vibration.
That's it precisely. The sound of the letters, the consonants, the vowels, that's what matters. But here's the really big philosophical curveball, you could say. The number 9.
Ah, yes. 9 is treated differently in Chaldean numerology. It's sacred.
Sacred, exactly. It represents perfection, spirit, completeness in this tradition.
Yeah.
So usually it's just excluded from the initial letter mapping. The calculation generally only uses digits 1 through 8. Now that tells you right away what the Chaldean focus is.
Sure.
It's emphasizing those external influences, fate, karmic patterns, things affecting your worldly success. It's seen as better for predicting external events.
Okay, so that's Chaldean. Then we kind of shift gears quite dramatically to the Pythagorean system. Founded by Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher, around, 570 BC?
That's the one. And this approach is much more systematic, mathematical. It feels more rooted in that sort of Western rationalism.
And the calculation is simpler here, right? Just A1, B2, up to I9, then repeat.
Simple and sequential. J becomes 1 again, K is 2, and so on. And crucially, the number 9 is just used normally. It's treated like any other digit in the calculation.
So if Chaldean is about external fate, where does the Pythagorean system focus?
It really turns inward. Because of its roots in systematic Greek thought, it tends to be applied more to your inner personality, personal talents, potential, self-discovery. It's often seen as better suited for psychological analysis.
And this difference in philosophy, it leads to totally different results for the same name, right? You gave the example of Rajneesh Karn.
Exactly. You run that name through the Chaldean system. Maybe you get a compound number first, like 19. That then reduces down to the single digit, 1. But run Rajneesh Karn through the Pythagorean system, and you end up with a different single digit, 7.
And you mentioned that intermediate number, the compound number like 19, is really important in the Chaldean method.
Absolutely vital. They place great emphasis on interpreting that compound number before you reduce it. It gives this extra layer of meaning about the specific forces or fate at play, whereas the Pythagorean method often just focuses more directly on the final single digit as the main characteristic.
So geographically, how does this play out? Who uses which system more?
Well, we see the Chaldean system favored pretty strongly in India and the Middle East, places with deep historical links to astrology and concepts of destiny. The Pythagorean method, though, tends to dominate in Western countries, the U.S., Europe, probably because of its more rational-seeming base and its focus on self-actualization.
Okay, so that's personal numerology, but let's pull back, like you said earlier. Look at the bigger picture, the cosmic structure. Even the rational Pythagoras seems to have drawn heavily on older ideas, especially from Egypt. You mentioned he studied there for years.
He did, reportedly nearly 20 years. And that Egyptian influence is, well, it's absolutely profound when you look closely.
Let's talk about that Egyptian number mysticism. You said they saw numbers as neteru, as gods or active principles.
Yes, Meteru. These weren't just abstract concepts like odd or even. They were active gendered principles, male or female. There's no neutral it with these numeric forces. And this context is key to understanding their concept of unity, the number 1. 1 wasn't just a number, it was the essence, the unpolarized source everything springs from. Neither odd nor even, but containing both.
And this leads into their creation story, the Egyptian Trinity, using numbers.
Precisely. You start with the complete one, Adam, the singularity. Then from this emerges the feminine principle, Isis. That's number 2. She represents divine mind, multiplicity, the start of differentiation. Then comes the masculine principle, Osiris, number 3. He embodies the universal soul, animation, dynamism.
And their union creates.
Their union produces Horus, number 5. He represents the material world, phenomena. And it's derived quite naturally, you see. 2 the feminine plus 3 the masculine equals 5. It's this beautiful progressive sequence that mirrors natural growth.
That idea of progressive, orderly sequences, that feels very Pythagorean, like the summation series, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on, each number being the sum of the 2 before it.
Exactly. That pattern, which we now often call the Fibonacci sequence, is everywhere in nature. The spirals on a pine cone, the seed arrangement in a sunflower. For the Pythagoreans, this was proof. Numbers were the blueprint of the cosmos itself.
And their whole worldview seemed anchored to the number 10, didn't it? Symbolized by the tetractys.
Ah, the tetractys. That triangle made from the first 4 integers, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 equals 10. 10 was their perfect number. They even swore their most sacred oaths by the tetractys.
This belief was so strong it actually influenced their astronomy. When Philolaus developed the Pythagorean cosmology.
Right. He proposed this model with 10 bodies orbiting a central fire. but there was a problem.
Wait, let me guess. They could only observe 9. Sun, Moon leading, Earth, the 5 known planets, and the sphere of stars? That's 9. So what did they do?
They did what any truly dedicated numerologist might do. They invented one. They proposed a theoretical counter-Earth, always unseen, orbiting opposite the central fire, just to make sure the total number of celestial bodies hit that perfect number, 10. It's a serious dedication to cosmic structure.
That's incredible, inventing a planet based purely on mathematical philosophy. And it also connects to their ideas about music, right?
Precisely. They discovered that the key harmonious ratios in music, the octave, 2.1, the musical fourth, 4.3, the musical fifth, 3.2, all use only those first 4 integers from the sacred tetractys. For them, numbers literally created the harmony of the spheres. Music was audible mathematics.
Okay, let's carry this need for order, for structure through numbers across to other cultures and into history. Let's look at numbers as timekeepers, as storytellers, maybe pivot eastward to Hinduism.
Good idea. Hinduism, often works with a circular concept of time, endless cycles of creation and destruction. And central to this cosmic view is the sacred number 108. Vedic mathematicians saw 108 as representing the wholeness of existence. It's said to connect the sun, moon, and earth through their distances and diameters. And you see it physically represented in the 108 beads on prayer strands, the malas, linking the individual to the cosmos during meditation.
We see a similar structuring principle in biblical numerology, too, using numbers symbolically to define history and prophecy, not just count things.
Absolutely. The most obvious one is probably 7, signifying perfection or completeness. 7 days of creation, the 7 branches on the menorah, even the 7 days of Shiva mourning in Jewish custom.
And then you have 40. That seems to stand for a generation or maybe a full period of trial or transition. 40 years in the desert, 40 days of temptation, the 40-year reigns of David and Solomon.
Exactly. It marks a complete, significant span of time. And conversely, you get these fragmented numbers like 3.5. It represents a broken week and arrested period. You see this pop up in apocalyptic writings like Daniel and Revelation, often expressed as 42 months or 12,260 days. It signifies a time of trial that doesn't reach that perfect 7-based completion.
What really stands out to me, though, is how the ancient writers seem to have used numbers to actively structure the historical narrative itself, like the ages of the patriarchs.
Right. From Adam down to Moses, their recorded ages were apparently compiled, or maybe even adjusted, to total exactly 12,600 years, which significantly is a multiple of that prophetic 12,260 days we just mentioned, times 10.
And there's that other example. The time between the Exodus and the building of Solomon's temple being calculated as 480 years.
Yes, and the text itself suggests how that number was reached. 12 generations multiplied by 40 years per generation. It imposes this perfect, meaningful structure onto history.
This is where gematria comes in, isn't it? Assigning numerical values to letters to connect names and words to prophecy.
Exactly that. Gematria is key here. When we look at, say, the famous number 666, the number of the beast from Revelation, scholars using gematria interpret this as the numerical value of the letters in Nero Caesar when written in Hebrew or Aramaic. And interestingly, it also connects back to King Solomon, whose annual intake of gold was recorded as exactly 666 talents. It creates this symbolic link between tyranny, excess, and this specific prophetic number.
And we even see gematria embedded in physical objects, like that Templar chalice you mentioned.
Yes, the Hebrew word chai, which means living or to give life, has a gematria value of 18. And this value, 18, is visibly designed into the chalice. There are 18 geometric triangles forming the rays around the cross. It reflects the Jewish custom of giving gifts of money and multiples of 18, giving chai as an act of charity, promoting life. It's literally built in.
Okay, let's journey far west now to the Maya. They had this incredibly sophisticated grasp of astronomy using numbers in really complex ways, that 819-day calendar count.
Ah, the 819-day count. Yes, initially researchers were puzzled by it. It has 4 cycles, but they didn't seem to align neatly with the synodic periods, the time it takes planets to reappear in the same spot in the sky of the visible planets.
But then there was a breakthrough theory suggesting a much longer view?
Exactly. The theory proposed the Maya weren't just tracking short cycles, they were thinking really long term. It suggested that it takes 20 cycles of 819 days, that's about 45 years, for the calendar to align commensurately with the synodic periods of all 5 visible planets: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn.
Wow. That implies an incredibly deep, complex system for long-term astronomical prediction. But Is it actually correct? Does the math hold up under scrutiny?
Well, this is where we need to be careful, and our source material raises a flag. While the 20-cycle theory sounds amazing, some skeptical analysis points out a problem. When you actually do the basic math, divide the known synodic periods of those planets into the total number of days in 20 cycles, 16,380 days, you apparently don't get the neat whole numbers that the theory claims for alignment. So the math seems to contradict the claimed synchronization. It makes the scholarship, while really fascinating, also highly suspect, according to some critics.
And that transition from these potentially profound ancient structures to modern mathematical scrutiny, that's really crucial, isn't it? It brings us to the modern critique. Why do many people today, especially in the sciences, view numerology as more of a pseudoscience?
Well, probably the most fundamental philosophical issue is that the entire system, or systems really, rely on a completely invented, culturally specific way of counting the base 10 system.
We use base 10 primarily because we have 10 fingers, right? But it's arbitrary, culturally speaking. Other cultures use base 12, base 60.
Exactly. And real mathematical constants, like pi, the ratio of a circled circumference to its diameter, they work universally. Doesn't matter if you use base 10 or base 12 or base anything. Pi is pi. But numerology calculations, the way letters are assigned to digits, they only work within base 10, and usually using the Western Gregorian calendar system as well. If you suddenly decided to use, say, a base 12 system, all the calculated meanings, the destiny numbers, they'd instantly vanish or change completely. That suggests it's a cultural construct, not a cosmic law.
Beyond the base 10 issue, there's also a problem with just testing it objectively, isn't there? How do you even set up a fair test?
It's incredibly difficult. Which system do you test? Chaldean? Pythagorean? There are others too, like Agrippan, or using Greek or Hebrew numerals directly. And then which name do you use for a person? Their full legal name, a nickname they prefer, a married name. The variables make it almost impossible to pin down and test in a scientifically rigorous, falsifiable way.
And when people have tried to test specific claims, the results haven't been very supportive.
Generally, no. Think about the 2017 study you mentioned, looking at the birth numbers of over 800 Nobel Prize winners. These are people who arguably achieved extraordinary things, fulfilled some kind of potential. If numerology genuinely reveals destiny or innate talent linked to birth dates, you'd expect the distribution of their birth numbers, the single digit derived from their date of birth, to be, well, statistically unusual, skewed in some way.
But it wasn't skewed at all, was it?
Not in the slightest. The distribution of birth numbers for all those Nobel laureates across all the different prize categories was essentially random. It didn't differ significantly from what you'd expect purely by chance.
And there was that other experiment testing the specific idea that number 7 is linked to psychic ability.
Right, a common numerological claim. But the experiment found zero correlation. If anything, the data hinted maybe number 5 had a slightly higher incidence among self-reported psychics, but even that wasn't statistically significant. No real link was found.
Okay, so if the mathematical basis seems arbitrary and objective tests tend to fail, why does the practice persist? Why do so many people feel like numerology works for them?
Yeah, that's the interesting part. It really comes down to human psychology. Numerology readings often rely heavily on what psychologists call Barnum statements.
Ah, those are the really vague descriptions that sound specific but could apply to almost anyone.
Exactly. Things like, you have a strong need for independence, but you can feel lonely if you lack support. Or you have leadership qualities, but sometimes you hesitate to assert yourself. They feel personal, but they're incredibly broad.
And once someone gets a reading with these statements, confirmation bias takes over.
Precisely. You receive this insight, and then you unconsciously start looking for evidence in your daily life that confirms it. You notice the times you felt independent, or the times you hesitated, and ignore the times you didn't. You essentially filter reality to match the prediction, reinforcing the feeling that the reading was accurate, even if the system itself is built on, well, shaky or arbitrary foundations.
So this has been quite a journey, a real deep dive into this quest for cosmic order through numbers. We've seen how powerful numbers are as tools for creating structure, whether it's seeking the harmony of the spheres like the Pythagoreans, or structuring complex histories and prophecies like biblical authors.
Yeah, the ancient world clearly used numbers to find or impose order on the cosmos. Modern adherents, maybe, are often looking for a similar sense of order, but on a more personal level. Whether numbers are truly mystical entities or just convenient symbols we use, they've undeniably shaped how humans perceive fate, themselves, and the passage of time. I mean, inventing a counter-Earth or devising something like the 819-day calendar shows this incredibly persistent human need to find pattern and symmetry even in apparent chaos.
We've explored how that ancient drive for order led to incredibly complex structures, like the Mayan calendar, but also perhaps to assigning life-altering fate to a name based on an invented base 10 system. So here's something to think about. If the perceived utility of numerology today often boils down to things like confirmation bias and these vague self-affirming statements, what is the modern impulse that keeps driving us, 2,500 years after Pythagoras first started connecting numbers to ancient Greek vibes? What are we really searching for when we try to find profound meaning in the simple math of our name or our birth date?
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got some really fascinating source material looking at, well, the hidden language of numbers. Are they divine secrets or just, clever writing tools?
That's really the heart of it. We're looking at everything from serious academic work on biblical structure, uh, logotechnical analysis, right through to modern, sometimes intense, online discussions about number codes and prophecies.
So our mission here is to give you a clear path through this. We want to sort out the verifiable structural stuff in ancient texts from, well, the more speculative claims you hear about numerology, especially gematria.
It's quite a journey. We'll touch on cryptograms, intentional literary design, and yeah, even some conspiracy theories.
Okay, let's dive in. We probably have to start with the most famous one, right? 666, the number of the beast in Revelation.
Absolutely. And the most widely accepted view, based on the sources, points pretty clearly to it being a numerical code gematria, in fact, for Nero Caesar, using the Hebrew alphabet values.
And that right there kind of sets the stage, doesn't it? If 6666 was a specific coded jab at a Roman emperor back then,
Right, it was like a riddle for people at that time. But if you treat it today as some kind of universal prediction formula, you're kind of missing the original point, the historical context.
okay, so let's talk more about their method gematria. It's like the
Okay.
Greek isopsephy, yeah. Assigning number values to letters.
Exactly. You sum up the values in a word or phrase. It's basically a form of cryptogram. Simple concept, but complex applications.
But the critique we see in the sources is that modern gematria often goes, well, a bit too far.
Yeah, that's a fair summary. It moves from analyzing, say, literary structure to demanding direct meaning or even action based purely on the numbers. The sources call this spiritualism.
Spiritualism,
Yeah,
like trying to pin down the divine with natural math.
sort of. Systematizing the spiritual to get predictable results. It's seen as taking numerology beyond its original, maybe more limited scope.
And this is where it gets really intense.
Yeah.
Some sources describe these extreme takes on gematria as, frankly, occultic.
Even claiming it's used to, quote, script reality. The claims get pretty dark, even suggesting it's used to murder people.
Wow, okay, how does that supposedly work?
Well, proponents point to patterns, like they claim the numerical value for words like death, murder, killing, rip. Even Masonic or Lucifer comes out to 38, or sometimes 83, depending on the cipher.
And they apply this how?
They connect it to events. The sources cite things like the death of Paul Gray, the Slipknot bassist. He died at 38.
Okay.
And proponents claim his full name, even an award he won, also calculated out to 38 using certain gematria methods. It's presented as evidence of this hidden script.
That's quite a leap. Are there other examples?
Oh, yeah. The 9/11 conspiracy theories often heavily involve numerology. Claims about the number 77, Flight 77, hitting a 77-foot part of the Pentagon on the 77th meridian.
Right, I've heard some of that.
And it goes deeper. There's a specific timestamp, 9.37.46, that supposedly, when converted numerically, equals 343, which is 7 times 7 times 7.
Okay, so sevens are significant too.
Very. And then you get really specific local examples, like linking the George Floyd incident to the number 46 and tying it to the star sign Gemini the twins because Minneapolis is one of the twin cities.
So the underlying idea is this: massive, hidden numerical code linking everything.
That's the claim, but the scholarly pushback is pretty strong. It's often described as, well, a load of nonsense. Because it relies so heavily on cherry picking. You can find synonyms, related phrases, different calculation methods. Basically, you can keep tweaking until you get the number you want. It can lead nowhere, as one source put it.
Right, you can make the numbers fit if you try hard enough.
Exactly. Whereas ancient gematria, while still complex, seems to have been more of a formal rhetorical or mathematical tool used by authors within the text for context or emphasis, not predicting external events centuries later.
And the sources place gematria alongside other divination practices, right? Like reading fire or tea leaves.
Yeah, pyromancy, hydromancy, tasseography. It's often grouped with methods seeking hidden predictive knowledge. It's that predictive element that draws the main critique.
Okay, so let's shift gears. Let's talk about the scholarly alternative, logo-technical analysis, or LTA.
Right. This approach looks at numbers in Scripture completely differently, not as predictive codes, but as intentional compositional devices, tools used by the authors for structure and meaning.
So, less about secret messages, more about literary craftsmanship.
Precisely, and it's not even entirely new. It's framed as a rediscovery in some sources. The Masoretes, those medieval Jewish scribes,
The ones who standardized the Hebrew text.
yeah, they were incredibly meticulous. They counted everything, verses, words, letters, and even located the mathematical centers of books, all to preserve the text perfectly. So attention to numerical structure is ancient.
Okay, so LTA is building on that tradition, looking for the author's intent in using numbers.
Exactly. Let's take a common example. The number 7. It pops up everywhere.
Right, signifying completion, fullness, God resting on the seventh day.
Exactly. Or, think symbolically, 7 years of feast, 7 years of famine in the Joseph story. Samson's 7 locks of hair representing his full strength. Lamech wanting 77-fold vengeance. It expresses completeness or abundance.
Okay, 7 is pretty well known. What about 40? I always think of, like, the flood, 40 days and nights.
Yeah.
Long suffering.
The sources connect 40 more specifically to periods of judgment or testing. It's about the trial, the proving. So yes, the flood, but also Moses on Sinai for 40 days, Israel wandering for 40 years.
And Jesus is 40 days fasting in the wilderness.
The classic example. It was a time of intense testing. So 40 signals that kind of period.
But then the analysis goes even deeper
Yeah.
into numbers most people wouldn't even notice, like 17 and 26.
Ah, yes. This is where you really see the argument for intentional high-level literary artistry. These numbers, 17 and 26, and their multiples, like 17 times 17 is 289, 7 times 26 is 182, they appear consistently, almost like a watermark, specifically within divine speeches in the Pentateuch.
The Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the first 5 books.
Correct. In the sections where God is speaking directly.
Why 17 and 26? What makes them sacred?
26 is the key. In Hebrew gematria, the holiest name of God, YHWH Yahweh, adds up to 26. Yod 10, He 5, Vavi 6, A 5.
Wow.
So the argument is that these numbers, 17 and especially 26, are deliberately woven into the fabric of the text, as one source puts it, to seal it with God's name, signifying God's presence and authorship within his own words.
Like a divine signature hidden in the math.
Pretty much. And it extends beyond just speech counts. The sources show patterns in the lifespans and even the numerical values of the names of key figures like Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, often involving multiples of 17 or 26 in structurally significant ways.
But wait, couldn't scholars just be finding patterns they want to see here too? Even if it's not about predicting, murders.
That's the critical question, absolutely. And LTA scholars address it by demanding rigor. The patterns need to be systematic, not just random occurrences. They have to appear consistently across related texts. And they need to be linked to established significant numbers like YHWH26, not just arbitrary totals. They're looking for evidence of conscious design, like structural artistry. A good example is the menorah pattern.
The menorah pattern, like the 7-branched lampstand.
Exactly. It's a structure where a text is organized into 7 sections, and the central section, the 4th one, is deliberately emphasized. It's the focal point.
How does that work in the text?
Well, for instance, in the laws about building the tabernacle in Exodus, there are 7 major divine speeches laying out the instructions. The 4th speech, the central one, is about the anointing oil and incense symbolizing God's presence and illumination.
Mirroring the central lamp of the actual menorah.
Precisely. Or, in Zechariah's visions, the 4th of 7 visions is the menorah vision itself. It's a recurring structural device pointing to the core message.
We see something similar with 7s and structure in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus, right? With the number 14.
Yes, absolutely. Matthew explicitly divides the genealogy into 3 sets of 14 generations.
Why 14?
Because in Hebrew gematria, the name David DVD adds up to 14. Delet 4, Vava 6, Delet 4.
So Matthew is hammering home Jesus' connection to King David, the royal line.
Exactly. It's a numerical way of saying this is the son of David. But there's another layer. Matthew lists 40 biological ancestors for Jesus.
40 again? Testing, maybe. Or just a number?
Well, consider Abraham. The numerical value of Abraham's name is 41. By listing 40 human ancestors, Matthew subtly implies the missing 41st begetter is the Holy Spirit.
Whoa.
Yeah, underscoring Jesus' divine conception while also fulfilling the promise to Abraham, making him the ultimate son of Abraham. It's incredibly layered.
Okay, that makes the transition to the apostles really smooth. From these hidden, complex structures to a very visible structure. the 12 apostles.
Right. The number 12 itself is highly symbolic, often seen as 3 times 4, 3 representing divine perfection, 4 representing the completeness of the created world, like the 4 corners of the earth.
So 12 means perfect organization, God's order in the world.
That's the idea. You see it with the 12 tribes of Israel, representing the whole people of God in the Old Testament. And then Jesus deliberately chooses 12 apostles to be the foundation of the new community, the church.
And they weren't just random followers, were they? The sources make a distinction.
A crucial one. Apostles means sent ones, like ambassadors. They were specifically chosen by Jesus, they accompanied him throughout his ministry, and critically, they were witnesses to his resurrection. That was the unique qualification.
And keeping the number at 12 was important, right? Like when they replaced Judas.
Absolutely. It shows that 12 wasn't just a convenient number, it was structurally fundamental to their understanding of the church's foundation, mirroring the 12 tribes.
Let's talk about a few of them. Peter, or Simon, the leader, but kind of famously flawed.
Definitely portrayed as passionate but inconsistent. Jesus' wordplay with his name is key. He calls him Petros, which means a stone, maybe even a loose rock. But Jesus says he'll build his church on this Petra, which means a massive cliff or bedrock.
So, on Peter's confession of faith, not necessarily on Peter the shaky guy himself.
That's a common interpretation. And Peter's symbol, the crossed keys, represents the authority to bind and loose, an authority Jesus seems to give to the whole community through Peter, not just Peter alone.
And then there's Peter's brother, Andrew, often in the background, but he was actually the first one called.
That's right. John's gospel highlights Andrew hearing John the Baptist, following Jesus, and then immediately going to get Peter. He's the first link in the chain. His symbol is the X-shaped cross, the saltire, or St. Andrew's cross, based on the tradition of his crucifixion.
What about Philip? He has a Greek name, which seems significant.
It does suggest connections to the wider Hellenistic world. He often comes across as very practical, maybe a bit literal-minded. Remember when Jesus tested him before feeding the 5,000? Philip just calculated the cost, totally missing the possibility of a miracle.
Right. His symbol includes a basket, doesn't it? From that story.
It often does, yes.
Then there's Bartholomew, who might be the same person as Nathaniel.
That's the traditional identification. Nathaniel means gift of God. He's known for that initial skepticism. Can anything good come from Nazareth?
A healthy dose of doubt, maybe. What's the tradition about him?
It's quite grim, actually. Tradition holds he was flayed or skinned alive while preaching in Armenia. So his symbol is often a skinning knife.
Oof. Okay, and we have to mention Judas Iscariot, the outlier.
The tragic figure. The only one of the 12 not from Galilee. Chosen, yet he betrayed. His symbol is usually the money bag, representing his role as treasurer, and, of course, the 30 pieces of silver.
But sometimes it's just nothing.
Yeah, sometimes represented as just a blank space or a yellow shape without detail, signifying perhaps that he's unworthy of remembrance, or simply the void he left in that foundational group of 12.
Okay, so wrapping this up, we've really seen two very different ways numbers are interpreted in these sources.
Definitely. On one hand, you have modern gematria, searching for hidden codes, often predictive ones, in numbers derived from current events. But as we saw, it often faces criticism for, well, methodological issues like cherry-picking data.
Right, finding the patterns you want to find.
And on the other hand, you have logotechnical analysis. This looks at the Bible itself and argues that the original authors deliberately used numbers like 7, 11, 17, 26 as part of the literary structure to embed meaning, emphasize themes, and even signify God's presence.
It really paints a picture of the biblical texts, especially parts like the Pentateuch, as incredibly sophisticated literary works. The level of detail in the numerical patterns, the lifespans, the names, the menorah structures, it's quite staggering.
It suggests a very conscious, deliberate artistry.
Which leads to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to consider. The sources bring up a verse, Deuteronomy 29:29. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever.
A key verse about revelation and mystery.
So thinking about all this complex numerical encoding we've discussed, when scholars uncover these intricate patterns, these hidden structures, are they honoring the secret things that belong to God? Or could focusing too much on the numerical code, however artistic, potentially distract from the things revealed, the straightforward message of faith, law, and narrative that's meant for everyone?
It's a really interesting tension to think about. Where does deep analysis meet practical faith?
Something to mull over. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Until next time.
50 miles south of Sicily, right there, smack in the center of the Mediterranean, you got Malta and Gozo. And look, if you've ever even glanced at the history of these islands, you know they're home to some structures that just, they defy explanation. I'm not talking about, Roman ruins or medieval forts. No. We're talking huge megalithic temples like Antija. I mean, they use stones weighing upwards of 50 tons. Just massive.
So critical.
These things were put up by a really sophisticated Neolithic civilization. And here's the kicker. They actually predate the famous Egyptian pyramids by over 1,000 years. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around that timeline.
It truly is astonishing engineering, yeah. Above ground, you have these monumental temples that look like giants built them.
Yeah.
But today, we're actually going even deeper. We're focusing on the subterranean counterpart to these structures, the Isle Saflieni hypogeum. Now, this isn't some natural cave system. It's a vast, meticulously crafted, rock-cut complex, probably meant to be, an acropolis, a shrine, for rituals. And for you, the listener, what's really key here is how it was found, basically through pure destructive accident. It popped up in 1902 in Paola. Some construction workers were digging cisterns for new houses and just, bam, broke right through the ceiling into this huge underground space.
Wow. And that accidental break-in, that's just the start of what has to be one of the most, frustrating archaeological stories ever. So our mission today is to take a real deep dive into the hypogeum's unique architecture, and the really unsettling history of archaeological loss surrounding it. Plus, the enduring mysteries which are highly controversial, including those legends of giants, and the unsettling truth behind some really bizarre physical evidence that's still around. Let's dig in.
All right, so when you look at the hypogeum, you just realize the sheer genius it took to make it. It's been described quite rightly, I think, as architecture in the negative, which means, they weren't stacking stones up.
No.
They were carving space down, just meticulously taking material away to create rooms and passages. And that carving went incredibly deep. The whole complex spans 3 distinct levels, all interconnected, plunging down 11 meters below street level. Just to use some context, 11 meters, that's deeper than a modern 3-story building is tall. And they did this around 4000 BC.
Think about that effort. Seriously. The earliest bits date back to then. So this enormous space, thousands of square feet dug out with only primitive tools, like stone hammers, antler picks, chisels, flint blades. And they weren't just digging a pit, they were sculpting chambers. Chambers that actually mimic the look, the details of the big temples above ground.
It really speaks to an incredible dedication, doesn't it? And organizational effort within that society, which honestly makes the later history of the site even more infuriating. The builder's precision was just immediately countered by the discoverer's carelessness.
That's the bitter irony, isn't it? So the original construction workers, they realized how huge this find was. And they actually tried to hide the discovery back in 1902, just to avoid stopping their, lucrative building project.
Yep. It took 2 whole years before it was officially reported and sort of secured.
Unbelievable.
And the chaos just continued when proper digging finally started. The first lead excavator, Father Emmanuel Magri, he was a really critical figure, a Jesuit, ethnographer, archaeologist, but he died suddenly in 1907. He was on a mission in Tunisia. And the huge loss here isn't just the man, it's that all of his crucial field notes just vanished, gone with him. We lost the first, probably most detailed record of a site that had already been messed with.
Oh, man. Imagine spending 5 years carefully documenting a whole civilization's necropolis, only for the historian's version of your master archive to just disappear forever. The frustration. It must have been immense. And it seems like the problems didn't stop there, did they? Even under Magri's successor, Themistocles Zamet, the guy revered as the father of Maltese archaeology.
Right. Despite his reputation, our sources are pretty clear that Zamet oversaw this massive, really inexcusable loss. His team dug up huge amounts of human bones and, they were discarded without being properly cataloged. We're talking critical primary evidence, just treated like, construction debris. It's just a catastrophe, historically speaking.
Wow. If Zamet was that sloppy, if he let thousands of unique artifacts just vanish, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? Were they actively trying to hide something even back then? Or did they simply not grasp the sheer importance of what they'd found?
It's hard to say for sure. Well, speaking of artifacts that did manage to survive Zamet's work, let's move into the middle level of the hypogeum. This is where the artistry, the skill the builders put in becomes really obvious. Heritage Malta calls this the star of the show, and they're not wrong.
Absolutely. The walls, the ceilings here. They're covered in these intricate red ochre paintings, spirals, spots, honeycomb designs, and they visually echo the carved doorways and lintels you find in the temples up top. It suggests this direct visual link between the world of the dead below and the ceremonial spaces above.
Hmm. And this level also gave us one of the most famous, really beautiful artifacts they recovered, the Sleeping Lady statuette. It's this wonderfully detailed little clay figure. Shows a woman lying on her side on this like precisely carved bed or couch. It's super significant because it gives us this rare peek into furniture, maybe domestic life, from the Maltese Neolithic period.
That's amazing. But beyond the visuals, there's something else going on here, something unique with sound, isn't there?
Hmm?
The real marvel seems to be the acoustic engineering, especially in that chamber they call the Oracle Room. This sounds like Stone Age tech meeting mystical experience.
That's exactly it. The hypogeum isn't just some quiet tomb, it's basically an acoustic instrument. The Oracle Room has this specific small niche carved into the wall, and it has these astonishing acoustic properties. If someone speaks into that niche, particularly in a low-pitched voice, often associated with a male voice, the sound gets dramatically magnified. It resonates, it travels throughout the whole complex.
Whoa. So this wasn't just accidental resonant properties, they engineered sound travel. And researchers actually detected specific frequencies in that resonance. What were they, and why do those matter?
Yeah, the research pinpointed a double resonance frequency, specifically at 70 hertz and 114 hertz when that niche is activated. Now, why those numbers? I mean, if you're listening now, 70 hertz might just sound like the deep rumble of a bass speaker, but these frequencies are actually highly relevant to, well, human physiology.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit. What are the implications of those specific frequencies?
Well, lab testing on brain activity suggests that 70 hertz is close to the frequency that encourages theta wave activity. That's often linked to deep meditation REM sleep. While 114 hertz is associated more with the start of alpha brainwave states linked to relaxation, reduced internal chatter. So basically, the resonance of the chamber itself could have supported ritual chanting, helped the people inside achieve a kind of mystic consciousness, maybe, or an altered state. Without drugs, they were using architecture to tweak the mind.
That is profound. I mean, a Stone Age sound system designed to alter consciousness.
Wow.
Wow, if you shift back to the main purpose, it was mostly this massive necropolis, right? An ossuary, a final resting place. But the whole debate about how many people were actually buried there seems just as chaotic as the excavation itself.
Oh, the numbers are wildly all over the place, which is,
Well-
a direct result of that lack of proper cataloging we talked about. Zamet, initially, he estimated around 7,000 individuals were buried there over the centuries.
Okay, 7,000.
Oh.
But then, just a few years later, his own assistant comes out with a completely different number.
Exactly. Zamet's assistant published this report in 1920, dramatically claiming the hypogeum held the bones of, wait for it, 33,000 people who had supposedly been sacrificed by some ancient cult. That number, 33,000, is clearly sensationalized, right?
Yeah, sounds a...
Later on, much more rigorous analysis working only with the few materials that did survive being thrown out suggested something different. From the roughly 7,000 bones they actually recovered and could study, maybe only about 120 individual skeletons were ultimately identified. I mean, the gap between 120 and 33,000 is vast, and it just tells you how much reliable data was lost right at the start.
Okay, so the loss of most of the bones is a tragedy in itself. But it leads us straight to the most controversial evidence that did survive. The skeletons, and especially the skulls that remained.
Right. And this is where the story gets, well, even darker, maybe stranger. Most of the remains were found just completely jumbled, heaped together in a haphazard manner, as the reports say, disjointed. This strongly suggests what's called a secondary burial practice, where the bodies were maybe left to decompose elsewhere or perhaps deliberately defleshed, maybe even ritually consumed. We don't know. And then only the dry bones were brought into the ossuary later.
A collective, kind of chaotic graveyard then. Was there any exception to that jumble?
There was one, yeah. One single intact human skeleton was found, and it didn't show signs of that secondary burial stuff. Instead, its position suggested what the researchers described as a severely emotional death. They pointed to the contorted, tightly clenched wrists and fingers of the right hand. It sort of implies this moment of really profound distress, either at the time of death or maybe when the body was placed there.
That's deeply unsettling, especially contrasted with the sheer mass of disordered bones around it. But the biggest oddity, the thing that really captured global attention, involves the skulls that survived. Zamet himself, who was a trained doctor, remember, he documented at least 12 skulls that were strikingly long-headed. Dolichocephalic is the term. They look almost well, alien-like compared to typical human skulls we see today.
And this wasn't just like a slight variation in shape. One of these really peculiar skulls apparently lacked the sagittal suture entirely. That's the seam that runs along the top of your skull, joining the two big parietal bones.
Right. Explain quickly for the listener why that's basically impossible for normal human development.
Well, the sagittal suture is absolutely critical. It allows the skull plates to shift and overlap slightly during birth, and then expand as the brain grows really rapidly in infancy and childhood. A skull that fuses that suture too early, a condition called sagittal synostosis, severely restricts brain growth sideways. It forces the skull to grow long and narrow. For a fully formed adult skull to completely lack it, it suggests either catastrophic, really early, intense artificial binding, or, much more controversially, maybe a fundamentally different biological structure underneath.
And this kind of evidence, it led to some pretty wild speculation very early on, didn't it? This idea of an alien race.
Oh, yeah, that definitely became part of the public narrative early in the 20th century. You can trace it back pretty directly to that widely read 1920 National Geographic report. It actually stated that the first inhabitants of Malta were potentially an alien race with elongated skulls.
Wow. Okay, so what's the standard anthropological explanation for this today?
Well, most mainstream anthropologists would argue pretty strongly that this elongation is the result of artificial cranial deformation or head binding, the intentional practice of shaping the skull from infancy. It was a tradition found in various ancient cultures all over the world. However, it's worth noting that Zammit himself observed that at least some of the hypogeum skulls seemed naturally long, not necessarily deformed by binding.
And this leads us right into the heart of the modern mystery, doesn't it? Because those unusual skulls, they aren't exactly easy to see today.
No, they are not. And this is the crucial point. These specific, highly controversial skulls were effectively hidden from public view after 1985. They were reportedly moved into storage, and apparently they're extremely difficult for independent researchers to get access to. And this decision to basically suppress the physical evidence has naturally just fueled intense speculation. People wonder if authorities are trying to conceal facts that maybe contradict the neat official historical story.
Yeah, I mean, given the sheer scale of the architecture, those mysterious acoustics we talked about, and then this really unsettling cranial evidence, it's maybe no surprise that Malta is just steeped in legends of giants.
Right. The megalithic structures themselves, above ground, they're permanently tied into the local folklore. Specifically, that story of Sansuna, the giantess, who supposedly built the massive temples like Agantija, while carrying her hybrid baby, no less. I mean, the name Agantija literally means giant's tower. Exactly. And the idea of actual physical giants wasn't just ancient folklore either. Gianfrancesco Abela. He was the 17th century chancellor of the Order of the Knights of St. John. He actually claimed to have personally collected these enormous bones that he believed belonged to 10-foot-tall giants. Now, we know today those were almost certainly prehistoric elephant bones, but the belief that massive beings once lived on the island, that was widespread.
Okay, so let's shift gears from ancient folklore to more modern, maybe verifiable conspiracy lore. And that seems to involve the hypogeum's restricted deeper levels and this widely circulated story about missing children.
Right, this centers heavily on the account of a woman named Constance Lois Jessup. She was British, and her passport confirmed she was definitely in Malta in the mid-1930s. She claimed that during a private tour she took, her local guide, a guy named Joe, led her through this secret small doorway on the deepest third level of the hypogeum, took her into a deeper, usually restricted area.
And what did she say she saw down there? In this cavern supposedly 50 feet below the ledge she was on.
Her report is, well, it's extraordinary. She claims she saw about 20 figures of giant stature. She estimated them between 20 to 25 feet tall. She described them as having elongated heads and this shaggy covering of white hair. And they were beckoning her from the darkness below. Apparently Joe, her guide, was terrified and immediately let her out.
Wow. Okay, and the follow-up to her story is just as weird, right?
It is. When she came back years later, hoping to prove her story, that deep passage she said she went through, boarded up, sealed, and the new official guide working at the hypogeum completely denied that her original guide, Joe, had ever existed. Just wiped him from the record, essentially.
Jessup's really specific account kind of ties into that famous, though definitely unverified urban legend that circulated for generations, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The story of the 30 school children and their teacher who supposedly vanished into some collapsed passage in the hypogeum and were just never seen again. That terrifying story even made its way into a 1940 issue of National Geographic, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, it is. And all these claims, the vanishing guy, the alleged giant sighting, the urban legend of the disappeared kids, they're all sort of set against the backdrop of the Hypogeum's current really tight restrictions. Today, all the tours, they're limited strictly to the first two levels. That's it. Furthermore, visitors have to remain completely silent throughout the tour. And you're absolutely prohibited from bringing cameras or even phones inside.
Okay, limiting access, sure, that's understandable for preservation. But forbidding any photography and insisting on silence, especially those main chambers, it definitely adds to the air of mystery. It raises legitimate questions, I think, about what authorities might be trying to prevent people from documenting, or maybe what sensitive acoustic details they want to avoid drawing attention to, especially regarding those deeper levels that are still sealed off. So we've taken our deep dive into the subterranean secrets of Malta, the Eosiflieni Hypogeum. It really stands as this breathtaking example of Neolithic engineering, where you have cutting-edge archaeoacoustics meeting deep, persistent folklore about giants, those strange, elongated skulls and missing documents.
The paradox just remains glaringly obvious, doesn't it? How did Stone Age farmers, who were operating without metal tools, without the wheel, how did they achieve such advanced, precise construction, such a sophisticated acoustic design? And why are so many crucial pieces of evidence, from Father Magri's vanished notes to potentially thousands of discarded bones to actual access to the deeper levels, why are they so effectively veiled or suppressed, both historically and even today?
It's this strange mix of incredibly advanced knowledge somehow coupled with appalling archaeological negligence, or maybe something more deliberate. It really forces you to question what we truly know or think we know about this whole epoch of human history.
Definitely. And here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe carry forward. The same people who built the Hypogeum also created the Anajra temple complex above ground. Now, the alignment of that temple suggests a really sophisticated understanding of astronomical precession. Some researchers argue it dates the site's alignment way back to around 10,200 BC. That's just after the cataclysmic Younger Dryas period, the time of the global Great Flood stories. So considering this potentially impossible astronomical knowledge from that era and the precision of the Hypogeum's acoustics and architecture, what other advanced secrets did these magnificent builders possess? Secrets that we maybe haven't uncovered yet from the parts of that underground complex that are still sealed off from us today.
It's probably the ultimate story of a global reset, this idea of the Great Flood. It just echoes everywhere, doesn't it? Across continents, thousands of years.
It really does. Noah, Manu in India, Deucalion for the Greeks.
Exactly. Almost every ancient culture seems to have this profound memory of the world being washed clean. But what if it's not just folklore? For this deep dive, we're focusing specifically on the earliest written accounts. We have those from ancient Mesopotamia. And we're going to smash those right up against some really modern archaeology and geology theories that suggest a massive actual cataclysm in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, that's the plan. Our mission today really is to guide you through this pretty fascinating body of evidence. We're pulling together sources spanning millennia.
4,000 years, right?
Easily. From Sumerian cuneiform tablets, 4,000 years old, right up to, cutting-edge sea level models and recent digs in the southern Gulf. We're exploring that potential link.
Between ancient memory and huge environmental change.
Exactly. Did one cause the other?
Okay, let's get into it. And I guess to really understand the myth, we have to start with the source material itself. These stories, they started in Sumer.
That's right. Etched onto clay tablets, some dating way back, late 3rd millennium BC. These are the originals.
Okay.
And for a long time, people just assumed, the inspiration was the annual river flooding. The Tigris and Euphrates can get pretty wild in the spring.
Right. A bad local flood gets blown up into a global story. Makes sense.
It does, but the details in the stories often feel much bigger, more total than just, a rough spring.
Yeah, it feels more final.
Exactly. And the why behind the flood, that's where you get a real glimpse into their mindset. The Sumerian king list, for instance, it just notes the flood swept over things, kind of a historical marker after these legendary kings with impossibly long reigns.
Right, like 241,000 years or something crazy.
Yeah, unbelievable numbers. But it's the later texts like Atrahasis that give us the motive. And honestly, it's kind of relatable.
relatable. How so?
Well, the chief god, Enlil, he just wanted some peace and quiet.
No way.
Seriously, the Atrahasis epic spells it out. Humans just multiplied like crazy, got incredibly loud, all the noise of civilization, basically. And it drove Enlil nuts because he couldn't sleep.
Okay, wait. So the world ends because the gods are cosmic light sleepers. It's like the ultimate noise complaint.
Pretty much. And, it wasn't his first move. He tried other things. First, plague, famine, trying to cut down the population quietly.
Oh, so population control methods.
Right. And when those didn't work, then came the flood order. It wasn't just a sudden rage. It was sort of a methodical plan born from sheer annoyance.
Wow. Okay, so from these texts, we get the flood heroes, right?
Yeah.
The prototypes for Noah.
Exactly. In the Sumerian version, it's King Zusudra. His name means something like life of distant days. A god, Enki, warns him, tells him to build a boat.
A sealed boat.
A sealed boat, yeah.
Yeah.
He survives for 7 days and nights and then gets eternal life in Dilmun, which many scholars think might be related to modern Bahrain.
Interesting. And then there's a more famous one, Utanapishtim.
Right, in the Gilgamesh epic, Tablet Exodi. He's often seen as the same figure as Atrahasis. He tells Gilgamesh his story, again, warned by a god, Ela this time, told to ditch his stuff and build a boat.
And this boat is memorable. The description is wild.
Oh, yeah. 6 decks high and shaped like a cube.
A cube, seriously.
Yep. Loaded with his family, gold, silver, craftsmen, and the seed of all living things.
So the whole ark concept. And he does the bird thing too, right?
He does. After the storm, sends out a dove, then a swallow. They both come back.
Meaning no dry land.
Right. Then he sends a raven. It doesn't return. Finds food, finds somewhere to land, so he knows it's over. Makes a sacrifice. And Enlil, kind of impressed, I guess, grants him and his wife immortality.
What's really amazing here, though, is how you can literally see the stories changing over time. Like they're editing each other.
That's absolutely the key point. It's not just separate myths. There's a clear line. Gilgamesh's flood story borrows heavily from Atrahasis. Sometimes it copies lines almost word for word. Wow.
And you can even see the editors at work changing things subtly, tweaking the theology, maybe.
How so? What did they change?
Well, sometimes they removed bits that made the gods seem too human, too frail. There's a line in an earlier version where the gods are described as sitting in thirst and hunger during the flood.
Huh. Not a good look for the divine.
Not really. So later versions changed it to something more, dignified. The gods feared the deluge.
Ah, okay. Strips away the petty needs, makes it more cosmic. Okay, but we need to pivot now. From divine annoyance to, well, maybe something more physical, this idea of the ghost land.
Right. This is where we try to connect the myth to maybe a real physical event. The theory is the story somehow remembers the actual flooding of the Persian Gulf Basin.
Which sounds dramatic. How far back do we need to go for that?
We need to rewind to the last ice age. The last glacial maximum, maybe 18,000 years ago, global sea levels were way lower.
How much lower?
About 130 meters lower than today, which is a lot.
And the Persian Gulf isn't that deep, is it? Exactly. It's pretty shallow. So drop the sea level by 130 meters, and the entire Gulf Basin is dry land.
Wow, the whole thing.
The whole thing. Not just, a muddy coast, a vast, fertile river valley. People call it the Gulf Oasis. Think of an area about the size of Great Britain.
So it wasn't desert back then?
Oh, not at all. It was fed by 4 big rivers. The Tigris, Euphrates, the Karun, and the Wadi Baton. They all flowed into this now submerged area, created huge freshwater marshes, lakes, really lush, an ideal place to live.
A refuge.
Definitely. Some call it the southern tip of the Fertile Crescent. And research suggests it might have been a really crucial place for early humans migrating out of Africa, maybe 75,000, even 100,000 years ago. A stable spot when other areas were too dry.
Okay, so you have this stable paradise for potentially 50,000 years. Then the ice starts melting. What happens next? What's the timeline for its destruction?
Well, the flooding, the inundation, it began gradually around 18,000 years ago. As global sea levels rose, the water crept in. Very slowly at first. It continued relentlessly until the entire oasis was gone, completely submerged by about 8,000 years ago. That's around 6,000 BC. By then, sea levels had actually overshot a bit, maybe 2 meters higher than they are even now.
Okay, but here's the problem, right? That sounds incredibly slow. Thousands of years for the water to rise. How does that turn into a myth about the world ending in like 40 days? The timeline seemed totally off.
That's been the major hurdle. That's the core conflict. For most of that 10,000-year period, the rise was maybe a meter every, 65 to 80 years?
So you might lose a bit of coastline in your lifetime. Your kids might have to move the village inland a bit. Annoying, yes. End of the world? Probably not.
Exactly. It's just too slow to be remembered as one single catastrophic event. It doesn't fit the suddenness of the myths.
Oh, wait. What if the myth isn't remembering the whole slow rise? What if it's remembering one specific catastrophic moment within that rise? A tipping point.
Ah, now you're getting to the newer thinking. Focusing on potential micro-events. We need something fast, something devastating within a human lifespan. Okay. And detailed mapping of the seafloor, it's pinpointed a potential moment. For around 11,400 years ago, sea levels had risen to a certain point, maybe about 80 meters below present levels.
Yeah.
And at that specific level, a tiny bit more rise. Maybe just half a foot, like 15 centimeters.
Just inches.
Just inches. But it seems that was enough for the rising saltwater sea to finally breach a natural barrier and catastrophically flood the largest freshwater lake system within the oasis.
Wow. So half a foot of sea level rise destroys this huge freshwater ecosystem that's been stable for, you said 50,000 years?
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Suddenly, salt water pours in. It would have completely collapsed the ecosystem. For the people living there, relying on that fresh water, those marshes, their entire world, their food, their water source, gone almost instantly. Contaminated by salt, flooded.
Okay, that's sudden. That feels like an apocalypse.
It does. And then you layer on the climate factor.
Right, because this is happening during a period of climate change.
A period of rapid global warming, roughly 11,700 to 11,000 years ago. And that warming probably shifted weather patterns dramatically, like the Indian monsoon system. It likely surged northwards, much stronger than usual.
So what does that mean? Bigger storms?
Potentially massive storms, imagine.
Wow.
The ocean is just breaching that critical point, saltwater flooding in. And at the same time, maybe you get hit by one of these monster monsoon storms. Climate models suggest they could dump, 10 or 15 meters of rain.
Meters?
Yeah. So picture this combination. Saltwater intrusion from the sea, plus unbelievable amounts of rainfall from the sky. The water level in that low-lying basin could have spiked incredibly quickly.
Could it reach flood levels in, say, 40 days?
It's plausible. Potentially, yes. It would have been utter devastation. It would force everyone out immediately. People who thought the sky and the sea had just turned on them.
So the myth remembers that moment. Not the slow creep, but the terrifying generation where their world drowned in weeks. The trauma gets encoded as this foundational story.
That seems to be the idea. It connects the geological timescale to the human mythological one. And guess where we find evidence of displaced people?
Right on the new coastline.
Exactly. We shift to the archaeology. Around 7,500 years ago, mid-6th millennium BC, you suddenly see over 60 quite sophisticated Neolithic sites pop up almost overnight all along the shores of the newly formed Gulf.
Popping up implies they came from somewhere established, right? Not developing slowly in place.
Precisely. These sites feature prominent stone houses, complex trade networks. They're trading pottery from Mesopotamia, for instance, evidence of boats. This wasn't a slow, primitive beginning. It looks like an established culture reappearing on the edge of the new sea. Some sources call these people the ichthyophagi,
Which means...
fish eaters. Makes sense, living on the coast.
So tell us about these sites. What did the survivors build?
Okay, well, take Dalma Island off the coast of Abu Dhabi. It's a Ubaid-related site. We find foundations of permanent buildings and, crucially, the earliest evidence anywhere in Southeast Arabia for people eating dates. Charred date stones from that time.
Suggests agriculture, or at least sophisticated gathering.
Right. Settled life. The diet was varied too. Sheep, goat, lots of fish and shellfish, turtles, even dugong. They adapted well.
Okay. Any others?
Then there's Marwa Island, also near Abu Dhabi. It has one of the best preserved Neolithic stone buildings found anywhere in the region. Really solid construction. One room they excavated had at least 5 human burials in it.
Burials inside the house?
Seems like it, yeah. Suggesting it might have started as a home, but later took on a special role, maybe for ancestors? Again, signs of a complex society, thinking about continuity and ritual.
You keep saying Ubaid related. What's the Ubaid culture, and why is it significant that these sites are related but maybe distinct?
Good question. The Ubaid culture originated up north, in Mesopotamia proper. It was incredibly influential, spread widely, known for its really distinctive painted pottery. Finding Ubaid pottery at these Gulf sites shows they were connected, trading north.
Okay, so they were part of that network.
They were part of the network, yes. But what makes these southern Gulf communities, these potential survivors, really stand out is something else they made. They found these unique painted plaster vessels.
Plaster, not pottery.
Right. Locally made plaster vessels, but painted with designs that clearly mimic the fancy imported Ubaid pottery. And they found these distinctive plaster vessels on both Dalma and Marawa.
So they weren't just importing, they were creating their own local version, a shared tradition.
Exactly. It's just a cohesive group, a shared identity, maybe a shared memory that was unique to these southern Gulf people. It wasn't found in other Ubaid sites further north or west. It points towards a distinct population, possibly displaced from a common homeland. Maybe the Gulf Oasis?
Okay, so wrapping this up, we have these two powerful stories running in parallel.
Yeah, you've got the myths, rooted in the gods being annoyed by human noise, divine punishment. And then you have the physical evidence pointing to this massive environmental upheaval, an event or series of events around 11,400 years ago that genuinely could have felt like the end of the world for the people living in that Gulf Oasis.
So what does this all mean? I mean, the power of these flood myths, maybe it's not just about a dramatic story. Maybe it's about the real generational trauma
Definitely.
of watching your home, this paradise that sustained your ancestors for maybe 50,000 years, just turn into a destructive saltwater sea, maybe in your own lifetime or your parents' lifetime. That's like a memory of catastrophic climate change written down thousands of years later.
It reframes the whole thing, doesn't it? And it leaves us with a really provocative thought to end on.
Oh, yeah.
Well, the Greek writer Berossos, who was drawing on much older Babylonian sources, he claimed that the flood hero, he called him Xisuthros, actually buried his city's records, its written knowledge, before the flood hit to preserve them. So if there was an advanced civilization living in the Gulf Oasis for all that time, what knowledge, what histories, what stories might still be down there? Buried under the mud and sand, preserved beneath the waters of the Persian Gulf.
Wow. A whole lost chapter of human history maybe waiting to be found.
Possibly. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Right. Let's unpack this. We were diving deep into one of the most explosive and frankly persistent claims concerning ancient America, the existence of a race of giants, maybe even technologically advanced ones.
Yeah, and this isn't just, whispers and folklore. We've got a pile of sources here, European explorer journals, indigenous histories, even contested archaeological reports, and, well, claims of cover-ups.
So today we're basically tracing this narrative from Patagonia all the way up to, the Ohio Valley?
Exactly. We're looking at this shared story of giants and trying to figure out, why these accounts from accepted historical figures seem to have been, well, scrubbed from the official history.
Okay, but let's put a critical lens on this right away. Source reliability. I mean, we accept Magellan mapping coastlines, DeSoto finding rivers, that's geography.
Right.
But giants, couldn't that just be exaggeration, fear, maybe playing it up for the folks back home? Why trust those specific entries?
That's the key question, absolutely. But the reason we're looking closer is the sheer consistency. We're talking reports separated by decades, thousands of miles. If it was just one sailor's tall tale, okay, dismiss it. But the earliest European accounts, the size descriptions are remarkably similar, even before they could have, cross-pollinated their stories.
Okay, give us an example. What's an early one?
Start with Amerigo Vespucci. This is 1499 off Curacao. His journal talks about finding these very large footprints of men on the sand.
The big footprints, okay.
And they find a village. The women, he says they were so tall, he gazed at them in astonishment. And the men, when they showed up, even bigger. Vespucci wrote one was taller when upon his knees than I was when standing erect.
Whoa. Okay, knees to standing. That's easily over 8 feet tall. Then fast forward 20 years, Pineda.
Alonso Alvarez de Pineda, 1519, Gulf Coast. His reports mention a race of giants from 10 to 11 palms in height.
11 palms? How tall is that?
That's pushing 3 meters, almost 10 feet. Nearly double the height of your average European back then.
And Pineda's account had some cultural notes too, didn't it?
Yeah, interestingly, he described them as friendly and living alongside pygmies, apparently, a diverse society. He was so convinced he actually named the Mississippi area the Giants River.
Okay, then let's head south. Magellan, 1520, Patagonia. Antonio Pigafetta, his chronicler, wrote about the Patagonians. Big feet.
Right, and Pigafetta gives a pretty specific size comparison. He said the biggest guy in their whole crew only came up to somewhere between the giant's waist and shoulder.
That's massive.
Okay.
And there was that weird gesture.
Yeah, lifting one finger to the sky, maybe asking if they came from the heavens. Who knows? It's a strange little detail.
But the Magellan story gets dark fast. The kidnapping attempt.
It really does. Magellan wanted proof, right? So he came up with this cunning trick, disguising iron leg fetters as jewelry.
That tells you something about their mindset, doesn't it? It wasn't just observation. It was about capture, conquest. Does that taint the size claims?
It absolutely colors how we read it. But the size description wasn't the reason for the trick. The capture was. And the chronicles do confirm they managed to chain 2 of them. Tragically, both died pretty quickly from illness on the ship.
So the story kind of validates the encounter, even while exposing how brutal the explorers were.
Precisely. Now let's jump back north. Hernando de Soto, 1539, southeastern U.S. His chronicler, Rodrigo Rangel, wrote about meeting the son of Chief Tuscaloosa, Black Panther.
And Rangel immediately called him a great-limbed giant.
Yeah, noted that the tallest Spaniards' heads only reached the giant's breast. But then they meet Chief Tuscaloosa himself,
Even bigger.
described as a giant mightier than his son, like a gnarled leafless tree, high up he towered. That specific image, gnarled leafless tree, it suggests something really out of the ordinary.
And Tuscaloosa wasn't just imposing, he had real power. De Soto took him hostage. Bad move.
Led straight to the Battle of Mabila. Huge ambush, something like 200 conquistadors killed. They burned the city, but Tuscaloosa's body never found.
So these accounts aren't just like isolated coastal weirdness.
Exactly. And they start to echo these really ancient, continent-wide beliefs found in indigenous traditions.
Right, let's pivot to that. The Aztec narrative. They had their own history of giants, the Quinametzin.
Yes, the Quinametzin. It translates roughly to men of great stature, or maybe the old ones.
And in their myths, these weren't just random monsters, right?
No, not at all. What's fascinating is how it ties into their creation story. The Aztecs believed the Quinametzin were the first people created during the age of the first sun. They were apparently already there when the Aztecs emerged from the 7 caves, Chicamastoc.
So the original inhabitants, according to them.
Basically, yeah. And you see this reflected in the landscape, too. Take the myth of the giant Zewa,
The one who built the pyramid.
the Great Pyramid of Cholula, yeah. Largest pyramid by volume in the world. The story goes Goa survived a great flood, and he and his 6 brothers built it as a sanctuary.
But maybe also to reach the gods as a challenge.
That's one interpretation. That they kept building it higher, trying to reach the gods who'd tried to wipe them out. And Cholula does have this vast network of tunnels, maybe 5 miles mapped. It kind of fits with this idea of an architect emerging from the earth.
And giant encounters continued right up to the Spanish conquest.
Absolutely. Maybe the most, let's say, credible or well-documented one is Silicatzin, the giant warrior defending Tenochtitlan in 1521.
Cortez mentioned him.
He did. Multiple witnesses confirmed Silicatzin was huge, probably over 10 feet tall, hurling massive boulders at the Spanish, apparently fought without armor.
And they couldn't take him down.
Never directly defeated him in combat, no.
Yeah.
Though he likely died later, maybe disease or starvation during the siege.
Okay, so Aztec warriors. But this giant narrative wasn't just in Mesoamerica. Let's go west, the Paiute legends.
Right, the Paiute people of the American West. They tell stories of the Sitka.
The two leaders.
Exactly. Described as red-haired, cannibalistic giants who were, well, a menace to their ancestors.
And the legend ends with them being trapped in a cave.
Yeah, the Paiute say they finally cornered the last of the Sitka in a large cave and basically burned them out. Set a huge fire at the entrance.
Which brings us to Lovelock Cave, Nevada. This is where it gets really interesting, potentially physical evidence.
It really does, because in the early 1900s, miners digging for guano in Lovelock Cave found mummies.
And they were big.
Well-preserved mummies,
Ah.
measuring between 6 and reportedly up to 8 feet tall. And crucially, they had reddish hair.
Reddish hair, matching the Paiute legend.
And significantly clear evidence of a massive fire having occurred right at the cave's mouth. So you have physical finds that seem to directly support the details of the old indigenous legend.
Okay, so now we shift gears. We have these historical accounts, indigenous legends, potentially corroborating finds like Lovelock. Why did the official story, the history books, just ignore or reject all this?
Well, this is where we get into the whole narrative of an institutional cover-up. Often it's linked to the Smithsonian Institution in the late 19th century.
Figures like John Wesley Powell and Cyrus Thomas.
Exactly. They were very influential, promoting what's called the isolationist theory.
And the goal of that theory was, what was the political angle?
Essentially, to create a neat, tidy, and purely American story of prehistory. It required indigenous cultures to have developed entirely independently, in a straight line, with no outside contact before Columbus, and certainly no room for, earlier, possibly more sophisticated peoples or giant races.
So classifying all the mound builders and unusual remains as direct ancestors of known tribes simplified everything.
It did. It allowed them to claim a kind of ownership over the narrative of the American past. The Smithsonian, under Powell especially, developed a reputation for excluding or dismissing evidence that complicated this clean timeline. Anomalies like giant skeletons just didn't fit.
But it wasn't like these finds were totally secret back then, right? Lincoln knew about them.
Right. There's that quote from Abraham Lincoln in 1848 talking about the eyes of that species of extinct giants whose bones fill the mounds of America have gazed on Niagara as ours do now. It suggests it was pretty common knowledge, or at least widely discussed.
Yet somehow the official story managed to bury it.
It seems so, because you have tons of newspaper reports and accounts from the late 1800s detailing skeletons found in mounds, Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois, measuring 7, 8, even over 9 feet tall, often measured by local doctors or professors, not just random people.
And then there's that frustrating claim that pops up again and again, the bones crumbling.
Ah, yes, crumbled to dust upon exposure to air. You see that mentioned for finds like a big one in Iowa in 1897. Very convenient, of course, for explaining why the evidence vanished almost immediately.
But beyond just height, there were these really specific, kind of bizarre physical details reported sometimes, things that are hard to explain away.
Exactly. Like the jawbone detail. Multiple independent accounts mention finding skeletons with jawbones so large they could supposedly fit over the face of an average living man. That implies a skull structure way outside modern human norms.
Okay, that's weird. But the weirdest, the one that really points towards something genetically distinct, has to be the teeth thing.
The double rows of teeth, yeah. That's probably the most striking anomaly.
And it wasn't just one report.
No, it shows up in multiple places, geographically distant and from different times. Accounts from New England, Massachusetts, Vermont in the 1800s. Then you have the report of that supposed 12-foot skeleton found near Lompoc, California. They specifically mentioned double rows of teeth all around the jaw.
Medically, that's not just a few extra teeth, is it? That sounds different.
Right. Normal hyperdontia usually involves extra teeth scattered randomly. This description implies a consistent, structured second row. If true, that would suggest a fundamentally different genetic trait, maybe even a distinct hominid lineage, not just a variation within Homo sapiens.
So the idea is that Smithsonian officials would have seen these reports, giantism, weird jaws, double teeth, and deliberately chose to classify them as just unusual Native Americans to fit their narrative.
That's the core of the cover-up accusation, that the evidence was ignored or suppressed because it didn't fit the desired simplified model of American prehistory.
Which brings up a deeper question. How far back does this kind of manipulation of the record go? We're not just talking about bones disappearing. What about visual records? Images?
Now that's a crucial point. Let's look at the early Virginia colony stuff. You have these watercolors by John White from the 1590s. One image, later used in Ogilvy's 1671 book, shows this tall female figure on a platform. Indigenous people around her, looking respectful.
And the height was symbolic.
White often used larger figures to denote importance, yeah. In this case, it's believed to represent Kawasa, a spiritual guardian figure for the local Algonquin people. It was likely documenting a real ceremony or figure of high status, like maybe King Powhatan.
But that image didn't stay accurate for long.
No. Almost immediately, engravers like Theodore de Bry started Europeanizing White's images in their own publications around 1590. They changed features, skin tones, setting a pattern for altering the visual record.
And it got worse than just Europeanizing, didn't it?
Much worse, driven by, religious and political agendas. Later reproductions took that same scene, that respectful Algonquin ceremony, and replaced the central figure with something monstrous. A Baphomet-like demon with wings, a tail, holding a candlestick.
But why? What was the point of that?
The clear intent seems to have been to portray the native people as devil worshippers, worshipping heathen, or rather pagan idols. It served to demonize them, justify colonization and conquest, make them seem barbaric, ungodly.
And this distortion persists, even now.
Unbelievably, yes. As recently as 2015, the Virginia Historical Society claimed that the original scene was basically invented by White, maybe borrowed from Mexican Indian practice. They effectively denied its local Algonquin significance.
So they perpetuate the idea that the original was fake, rather than acknowledging that the original, possibly accurate depiction was later corrupted for propaganda.
Exactly. It continues the dismissal of the original context and the reality of the manipulation itself.
Okay, so wrapping this up, where does this leave us? We've traced these giant accounts from explorers like Magellan to Aztec warriors like Katzin. We've looked at archaeological claims, huge skeletons, double teeth, red hair matching legends, and then clear evidence of visual records being deliberately altered and suggestions of institutional suppression. What's the takeaway?
Well, if you accept the evidence that institutions, going back centuries, have actively manipulated images, suppressed reports, maybe even hidden physical evidence, all to create a specific, simplified narrative of the American past, one that conveniently erased any trace of potentially sophisticated giant predecessors.
Then the really provocative question for you, the listener, becomes, what other parts of our accepted history, especially things based on those early selective colonial records from the 15th and 16th centuries, might deserve a much more critical look? Maybe the biggest discovery isn't whether the giants were real, but the undeniable fact that the story of giants was actively suppressed, and you have to ask why.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're not just digging into archaeology in the usual sense. We're looking at this collision point where mythology seems to crash right into advanced physics.
Exactly.
So we're embarking on a deep dive into some of the most, let's say, controversial claims out there. That ancient texts, thousands of years old, describe these incredibly sophisticated flying machines, vimanas, anti-gravity ones, no less.
And not just flying machines. They also seem to talk about wars. Wars fought with weapons that sound unnervingly like atomic bombs.
It's an explosive thesis, you could say, almost literally.
Yes. Our sources today, they're mainly rooted in some pretty meticulous textual analysis. We're talking ancient Hindu epics, the Vedas, the Mahabharata, and also that often debated text, the Vaimanika Shastra. And the aim, really, is to try and systematically decode the technical details, these little nuggets buried within what are often seen as purely spiritual or, historical accounts.
So our mission here is to give you, the listener, a kind of framework for understanding these claims. We'll be digging into the core textual evidence, trying to analyze these bizarrely specific technical details.
And there are so many specifics: metallurgy, propulsion systems.
Exactly. And crucially, we have to grapple with the bigger picture too, the philosophical side. This idea of a Vedic science, which the sources call science VED, and how that lines up, or maybe doesn't, with our modern empirical science, what we're calling science EMP.
It's a fascinating comparison. And maybe to appreciate just how radical this reevaluation of history is, we should start where some of the Western engagement began. Think about this quote. It's from Colonel Henry S. Olcott back in 1881. This is way before the Wright brothers, remember?
Right, before powered flight as we know it.
He said in a lecture, "The ancient Hindus could navigate the air, and not only navigate it, but fight battles in it." And then he adds this kicker. To be so perfect in aeronautics, they must have known all the arts and sciences related to the science, including the strata and currents of the atmosphere, the relative temperature, humidity, density, and specific gravity of the various gases.
Okay, that's stunning for 1881.
Yeah.
He's not just saying they had flying carts. He's implying mastery of aerodynamics, meteorology, material science, the whole package.
Precisely. That level of knowledge implies a whole scientific infrastructure, right? Not just some lone genius inventor.
Yeah, a fully formed civilization focused on this stuff. Okay, let's use that idea, this concept of a complete aeronautical civilization, as our launch pad. Let's dive into section 1, the historical record, the textual descriptions. So when we talk about ancient aeronautics based on these texts, it's apparently far beyond just simple planes or chariots.
Oh, much more. We're talking about structures that suggest a total commitment to high-altitude living and travel. The Mahabharata, for instance, it repeatedly describes flying aerial cities.
Not just vehicles, but cities in the air.
Exactly. That's a huge distinction, isn't it? It moves it way beyond just, a flying chariot for a god.
Right.
These were, according to the sources, vast mobile habitats, which points to, as they put it, a higher degree of scientific achievement and technical skill than we usually imagine for those times.
Think about the logistics needed for that. A mobile city. You need life support, food, waste management, sustainable propulsion for the long haul.
Absolutely. And the scale implied is immense. The text consistently suggests these cities, and the larger craft too, moved incredibly high up.
Oh, how are we talking?
Descriptions mention above the region of the clouds and very probably in the exosphere region.
The exosphere, that's basically the edge of space. It sounds almost like orbital or near-orbital capability
Right.
millennia ago.
It does stretch the imagination, I know. And the Vimanas themselves, they weren't just one design like a Model T Ford.
No.
No, the variety described suggests a long period of development, refinement, almost like looking through an old manufacturer's catalog.
Okay, like what? Give us an example.
Well, the most famous one, probably from the Ramayana, is described as a double-deck circular aircraft with portholes and a dome.
Wait, double-deck, circular, portholes, dome? If you describe that today, people would immediately think.
Flying saucer. Exactly, a classic mid-20th century UFO description.
And how did it fly?
It was noted to fly with the speed of the wind, which is vague, yes, but also gave forth a melodious sound.
Melodious sound. Not like a roaring engine then. Suggest something smooth, maybe?
Perhaps. Smooth operation, speed control maybe. But that saucer shape, that was just one type. The texts also detail, get this, cigar-shaped airships.
Okay, long cylinders.
Mm.
More like a dirigible or
Mm.
something else.
Seems like it. Implying craft capable of holding more people, maybe cargo, traveling long distances. Then you have these specialized models mentioned.
Like military versions?
Possibly. There's the Tripura, described as having 3 stories, and the Sakuna, which was apparently bird-like in shape.
3 stories. Bird-like, circular cigars. It's quite a range.
It is. And the sources we looked at claim there were actually 113 documented subdivisions branching off these 4 main types.
113
Yeah.
subdivisions. That doesn't sound like myth anymore. That sounds like, I don't know, the ancient Indian equivalent of Jane's All the World's aircraft.
It does have that feel, doesn't it? That level of detailed taxonomy. It really suggests a practical, widespread technology. Something that needed specific classifications for different uses.
Yeah, standardization.
Yeah.
Engineering for different missions, high altitude, short hops, maybe troop transport, who knows?
Exactly. And this tech, it wasn't just, sitting in a lab somewhere. It was deeply woven into their spiritual and religious stories.
Right, the Vimanas often show up as the vehicles of gods or heroes or kings.
Blurring that line between what we'd call divine power and what might have been high technology.
Mm-hmm.
Take the Srimad Bhagavatam. It describes a king, Siddhaketu, traveling through outer space. Not on a magic carpet, but on a brilliantly effulgent airplane given to him by Lord Vishnu.
So the gift is divine, but the object. It's described as an airplane, a functional machine.
Seems so. Capable of space travel, no less. And we see this idea of widespread use pop up elsewhere, too. In the Mahavira of Pavaputi, that's a Jain text, referencing older traditions, It talks about the Pushpaka aerial chariot. But not just carrying one hero, it's conveying many people to the city of Ayodhya. And listen to this description of the sky.
Yeah.
It says the sky was full of stupendous flying machines, dark as night, but picked out by lights with a yellowish glare.
Wow. Full of them. Dark with yellowish lights. That's incredibly specific. It sounds like air traffic control might have been busy.
Doesn't it? Not just a single hero on a solo flight, but potentially dozens of large, dark craft, maybe with navigation lights or power glows. The fact that this imagery appears across different texts, different traditions, it strengthens the idea that maybe this was a shared cultural memory of something real.
Even in the really old texts.
Yeah.
Like the Rig Veda.
Even there. The Rig Veda describes the chariot of Vada, the god of wind. It's called thunderous. It can touch heaven. It makes the light lurid like a red fiery glare, and it whirls up dust on the ground.
Powerful, noisy, bright machines. Sounds like they made quite an impact.
Definitely sounds like more than just a horse-drawn cart. Now, here's where it gets even stranger, maybe. Let's bring this technology down from the sky.
Okay.
Because one of the most unexpected claims in the sources is that these flying machines actually influenced later architecture on the ground.
How so? They built temples that look like spaceships?
Basically, yes. The Samarangana Sutratara, another ancient text, explicitly claims that temples were designed after models of flying machines. It shows, the source says, an overt cognizance of this link.
So they were intentionally trying to make their temples resemble these Vimanas. Like memorializing the technology in stone.
That seems to be the argument. And you can kind of see it if you look at certain structures. Early temples like the Harmakasira temple, which is sort of conical, or the Virupaksha temple at Patadakal with its tapering shape. The overall structure, it does bear a resemblance, the sources argue, to a vertically oriented craft. Maybe like a modern helicopter or a VTOL, but, flipped upside down and made huge.
Oh. I'd have to see pictures side by side, but okay.
Yeah.
Any big examples?
The main one cited is the giant Konaraka temple. It was explicitly designed to be the chariot of Surya, the sun god.
The Sun Chair Temple, right. I know that one. Huge wheels carved on the side.
Exactly. And its core structure was built using an octagonal pattern on this massive rectangular base. The point is, the architects seem to have been deliberately embedding the memory, the form of these powerful vehicles into their most sacred, permanent buildings.
Suggesting the Vimanas weren't some fringe legend, but maybe central to how they understood power, cosmology, everything.
That's the implication, yes. That this knowledge was fundamental.
Okay, so we've got the scale flying cities, dozens of types, influencing architecture. But scale doesn't fly on its own. You need power, you need blueprints. Which brings us to the really, really controversial stuff. The technical claims.
Right. And the main text people point to for the mechanics is the Vimanaka Shastra, attributed to Maharishi Bharadwaja.
And the headline claim from that text, according to our sources, is
That there seems to be no doubt Vimanas were powered by some form of anti-gravity.
anti-gravity. There it is. Now, before we dive into that,
Hmm.
the Vimanika Shastra itself, we need to add a little note here for the listener, right? About its authenticity.
Yes, absolutely. It's crucial context. While we're analyzing the claims in the text based on our sources, it's important everyone understands that mainstream Sanskrit scholars, while they often date the final writing of this specific document much later, like early 20th century.
So the argument is it might be someone in the 1900s interpreting older ideas, maybe through a modern lens, rather than a purely ancient text itself.
That's the debate, yes. Is it a direct transmission or a reconstruction? Potentially, with later ideas mixed in. We don't have the final answer, but Bharadwaja himself in the text refers to older sources.
Okay. So we're looking at what the text claims, understanding there's this debate about its origins, and it claims anti-gravity. How is that described?
The functionality described is consistent with it. Vertical takeoff, the ability to hover motionless in the air, much like a modern helicopter or maybe a dirigible, but potentially without downward thrust.
Which would imply some force countering gravity directly.
Exactly, and the text tries to lend itself credibility by citing its own sources. Bharadwaja supposedly refers to no less than 70 different authorities and 10 experts on air travel from antiquity.
70 authorities, 10 experts. Where are their books?
Vanished, lost to time, apparently. Which, proponents argue, suggests a huge body of scientific knowledge that was catastrophically lost, making these surviving fragments, even if confusing, incredibly important.
Okay, let's get into the engine room, so to speak.
Mhm.
Where were these things kept, and what did they run on?
They were kept in a Vimanagriha, basically a hangar. As for fuel, this is where it gets murky and really interesting.
How so?
Sometimes it's described as a yellowish-white liquid, but the most frequent and most detailed fuel source mention is mercury, specifically a purified mercury compound.
Mercury, like the liquid metal.
Yes. Though the sources acknowledge there's confusion, they state that later writers, looking back at earlier texts, were understandably confused on the principle of their propulsion.
Understandably confused. That sounds about right. It could mean the technology was lost and people were guessing based on fragments.
That's a very plausible interpretation. Maybe the mercury wasn't the primary fuel, but, say, a working fluid, or a catalyst, or part of the propellant system, but not the energy source itself. Later generations might easily confuse those roles if the core science was gone.
But the mercury idea, that's the one that really jumps out, isn't it? Because it connects to modern physics in a weird way.
It absolutely does. It points directly towards plasma physics and specifically ion engines.
Ion engines. Explain that connection.
Well, ion propulsion works by accelerating ions charged particles using electric fields to create thrust. It's very efficient for space travel. And what do you need for an ion engine? A propellant. Something easily ionized and preferably heavy.
like mercury.
Exactly. Mercury was one of the first propellants seriously researched for ion engines in the mid-20th century by NASA and others. It offers high thrust for the power used. So these ancient texts talking about purified mercury for propulsion, it sounds startlingly like they're describing a mercury ion drive.
And the texts claim this knowledge is ancient.
The sources emphasize that mercury itself was known in India way, way back, maybe 11,000 years ago, they suggest.
Okay, but using it in an engine, that requires processing, right? It's toxic stuff.
Highly toxic. And the texts actually describe the preparation method in almost ritualistic detail. The Dharnadhar Samhita supposedly gives 16 distinct steps to purify mercury.
16 steps. Like what?
The process is called Shodhana, purification, or sometimes bosma, calcination. It involves things like heating thin metal sheets, then immersing them in substances like oil tala and cow urine gomutra.
Cow urine. Okay, that sounds alchemical.
It does have that flavor, doesn't it? Or calcining the mercury in crucibles heated with cow dung fires called puttam. But think about it. If you were trying to develop something like an ion engine using mercury, you'd face huge problems.
It's like the toxicity.
Toxicity, yes, but also containing high-temperature plasma, dealing with electrode erosion. These were major hurdles for modern engineers working with mercury ion drives in the 50s and 60s. NASA eventually switched to xenon partly because of these issues.
So does this incredibly detailed, almost ritualistic purification process, even with the cow products, does it suggest they actually mastered those problems?
That's the tantalizing question. Is it just alchemy? Or does the sheer specificity, the 16 steps, the controlled heating, the specific quenching agents imply a lost practical understanding? A way to stabilize and process this dangerous element for essentially industrial power generation. It hints at a forgotten mastery of plasma physics, needing immense control over temperature and chemistry.
Wow. Okay, moving beyond the fuel.
Yeah.
What about the ship itself, the materials?
Equally specific, the texts apparently detail three main types of metals: somala, sandalika, and morthwika.
Names I've never heard.
Exactly. And when combined in certain ways, they supposedly resulted in 16 different kinds of specialized heat-absorbing metals, again, with untranslatable names like Ushnam Vara.
Heat absorbing. That makes sense. If you've got a powerful engine or you're moving fast through the atmosphere, Ushnavara, does that mean anything?
Roughly translates to heat-bearing or heat-absorbing. So yes, it points directly to thermal management, which is critical for high-speed flight or powerful energy sources.
And they knew how to work these metals.
Apparently so. The texts are said to explain how to clean the alloys using acids from lemon or apple and detail the right oils and temperatures for forging or shaping them. It sounds less like myth and more like, well, proprietary industrial processes.
Like the kind of stuff Boeing or Lockheed Martin would keep secret today.
Precisely. And it doesn't stop there. There are descriptions of 7 different types of engines, supposedly suited for different altitudes or functions.
7 engines.
And power systems that included solar energy collectors. The Vaimanika Shastra apparently specifies using 8 tubes made of special glass to capture the sun's rays.
So, knowledge of specialized materials, metallurgy, multiple engine types, and renewable energy.
That's what's claimed, and all this complex engineering, unsurprisingly, seems to point towards sophisticated military uses, which Bharadwaja's text lays out in the 7 Secrets of Flight, the Vaimanika Shastra.
The 7 secrets. Okay, this sounds like the good stuff. Ancient aerial warfare tactics. Let's run through them. What's first?
First is Gudha, means hiding or concealed.
Stealth.
Essentially, yes. It describes using the dark content of the solar ray, maybe manipulating light, and harnessing atmospheric powers, yasa, vyasa, prayasa, found in the 8th atmospheric layer to make the Vaimana invisible.
Exploiting atmospheric layers for stealth.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next. Drishya means visible or to be seen, but used here for camouflage or illusion. By creating a Maya Vimana, basically a phantom or decoy Vimana, this was done by reflecting a glow generated by colliding electric and wind power using a special mirror called the Vishwa Kriya Drapana.
Creating optical illusions to confuse the enemy. Cloaking, decoys, very modern tactics. What about offense?
Ah, yes. Vimukha means averting the face or disabling.
Disabling how?
This involves projecting poison powder. Specific substances like kubera are named, fired through a tube in a mirror.
A mirror weapon.
Seems so. The effect: to produce wholesale insensibility and coma in enemy crews, basically chemical or biological warfare delivered from the air.
Grim. Okay, what's next? Rupakashana.
Yes, Rupakashana. Intelligence gathering. This one is really startling.
Why? What does it describe?
It describes using a photographic yantra, a device or instrument in the Vimana, to get a television view inside enemy planes.
Hold on. A television view inside an enemy plane. In ancient texts, that sounds anachronistic, doesn't it? How do the sources explain that?
That's exactly where the skepticism gets loudest, especially regarding the Vaimanika Shastra's dating. Critics point to television view as clear proof of 20th century influence.
Makes sense.
But proponents push back. They argue yantra just means device or instrument, and the core concept is remote visual interception. Seeing inside an enemy craft from a distance, whether the mechanism was optical, like a powerful telescope or something else, the claimed function is the key. It implies a deep understanding of light, transmission, capture.
Remote surveillance, basically.
Okay, one more.
Last one mentioned here is chapla. Seems to mean agitation or trembling used for attack.
How does this attack work?
By generating a high-speed atmospheric wave, the text gives a specific frequency, 4087 revolutions an hour, whatever that translates to precisely. You turn a switch, it sends out this wave.
And shakes the enemy plane apart.
That seems to be the idea. To violently shake it, destabilize it. We're not talking magic here. The description implies calculating resonant frequencies to physically destroy a target.
The level of detail in these secrets, it's staggering. It really does sound less like myth and more like, well, an operations manual for aerial warfare.
It certainly pushes us to reconsider what might have been possible, or at least what was recorded as being possible.
And the moment you have aircraft with stealth, chemical weapons, surveillance, you know they were built for conflict. Which leads us straight into Section 3, and the most terrifying implication of all, ancient descriptions of what sounds disturbingly like atomic warfare.
Yes, the context provided by the sources is, well, it's catastrophic. They talk about a civilization called the Rama Empire.
Located where? When?
Supposedly in northern India and Pakistan, flourishing maybe 15,000 years ago, the sources suggest, possessing incredibly advanced technology.
15,000 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And what happened to them?
According to these accounts, they weren't destroyed by invaders or natural disasters. They were destroyed by wars. Wars fought amongst themselves using these advanced vehicles and what are described as futuristic weapons.
Self-destruction with high technology.
That's the narrative. And the memory, the trauma of this ancient annihilation was supposedly so profound that it echoed down the centuries. It's claimed that King Ashoka,
The famous emperor, 3rd century BCE, known for converting to Buddhism, renouncing violence.
that's the one. He was reportedly aware of this ancient history, this catastrophic war, and the sources suggest this was his main reason for trying to keep certain knowledge secret.
What knowledge?
The dangerous stuff, the blueprints, the operating principles of these incredibly destructive weapons and vehicles. He might have even actively destroyed records.
So Ashoka as a keeper of secrets, trying to prevent history from repeating itself.
Essentially, yes, a policy of deliberate technological suppression born from the belief that same knowledge is just too dangerous for humanity.
And that fear seems horribly validated when you read the descriptions in the Mahabharata. They read like eyewitness accounts of a nuclear blast and its aftermath.
They are chillingly specific. The text describes the omens before the main event. Winds blew, meteors fell in thousands, thunder rolled through a cloudless sky.
Sounds like atmospheric shock waves, maybe an EMP effect. Strange weather anomalies.
Could be interpreted that way. And then there's the weapon itself, the Brahmastra.
The ultimate weapon in the epics, right?
Yes. Drona warns Arjuna it's an irresistible weapon that could destroy the world. And crucially, it was forbidden to use it against ordinary human foes. The implication is its power was just too immense, almost planetary in scale.
And when it is used,
Yep.
What does the text say happened?
The description focuses on overwhelming energy. The arrows released appeared like fiery beams emanating from the sun globe.
Fiery beams from the sun, like the initial flash and thermal pulse of a nuke.
It certainly sounds like it. And the immediate result, total instant annihilation. Combatants fell like falling suns, people and elephants burned instantly.
Horrifying. What about the aftermath? That's often the key identifier for nuclear weapons.
Exactly. And this is where the descriptions become almost medically precise, matching what we now know about fallout and radiation. The text says, the water boiled, the animals died. It mentions trees collapse and rose.
Boiling water, trees flattened, suggests immense heat over a wide area, like a thermal wave.
Yes. And the description of the dead. Corpses were mutilated by the terrible heat so that they no longer looked like human beings.
Just charred remains. But the radiation sickness part, that's the clincher, isn't it?
It really is. The text includes this incredibly accurate detail. It says the poisoning, the effect of the weapon's lingering power will make hair and nails fall out.
Hair, nails falling out. That is a classic, specific symptom of acute radiation syndrome, something nobody in the pre-atomic age should have known or been able to describe clinically.
Precisely. Until Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that specific biological effect wasn't part of common knowledge anywhere. Yet here it is, laid out in an ancient epic. It really forces you to confront the possibility. Were they describing something they actually witnessed or had meticulously recorded? The effects of a weapon that defies conventional explanation for that era.
It's deeply unsettling. And if they had weapons like that and vehicles like Vimanas, where does it end? Do they claim travel beyond Earth?
Well, this is where the claims reach their most extreme point. The sources mention Sanskrit documents, supposedly found in Lhasa, Tibet, translated by a Dr. Ruth Reyna.
Found in Tibet, what did they contain?
According to the report, they contain directions for building interstellar spaceships.
Interstellar. Not just atmospheric flight, not just orbit, but ships to travel between stars.
That's the claim. And the propulsion method described. Anti-gravitational, similar maybe to the Vimanas, but linked to a concept called legima.
Legima, what's that?
It's described as an internal power, the unknown power of the ego existing in man's physiological makeup. A psychic or yogic ability almost.
So, wait. The spaceships weren't just mechanical, they were powered by the mind.
Yeah.
Or consciousness.
That seems to be the idea. This legima power could supposedly generate a centrifugal force, maybe a mistranslation or misinterpretation of the physics, powerful enough to counteract gravity. It could allow a person to levitate or potentially propel a craft.
Mind over matter, literally powering starships. We're back to that integration of the spiritual and the technological.
Deeply integrated. In this view, the highest levels of technology aren't achieved just through material science, but through mastery of the inner self, the life force, the prana. Technology becomes an extension of consciousness.
Which sets up a fundamental clash with how we view science today, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It leads us right into the philosophical debate.
Okay, so if these ancient texts genuinely contain blueprints for anti-gravity, descriptions of atomic weapons, maybe even interstellar travel, how on earth do we fit that into our modern scientific worldview? This science VED, the Vedic or spiritual science. How does it stack up against our empirical science, science EMP?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's not just a historical puzzle. It's a deep philosophical, even ontological debate. And it's not a new one, actually.
No.
This conversation, especially in the context of Hinduism and modernity, has been going on for over a century. Think about Frederick Soddy.
The physicist, early 20th century Nobel laureate.
That's him. Way back in 1909, he was already speculating about this. He wondered if there had been some former forgotten race of men who had attained not only to the knowledge we have so recently won, but also to the power that is not yet ours.
Power not yet ours. In 1909, what was he thinking of?
He explicitly tied it to potential destruction. He said, I believe that there have been civilizations in the past that were familiar with atomic energy, and that by misusing it, they were totally destroyed.
Wow, in 1909, that's decades before the Manhattan Project. He was already connecting forgotten ancient knowledge with atomic self-destruction.
He was, which shows this idea, this correlation, has been floating around in scientific circles for a long time. And contemporary Hindu writers, especially those involved in Hindu modernism or revivalism, often pick up on this thread.
How do they frame it?
Well, the argument often goes that science VED doesn't actually conflict with science EMP. Instead, it supplements or confirms it.
Supplements it how?
By providing a bigger picture. They position science VED as a superior, more holistic system. It takes all these fragmented disciplines we have, chemistry, physics, metallurgy, whatever, and places them onto a unified, holistic spiritual plane.
So the idea is modern science gets lost in the details, the mechanics, whereas ancient science understood the underlying unity, the connection between mind, spirit, and matter.
That's the core argument. But there are some pretty significant conceptual hurdles in trying to actually merge these two worldviews.
Like what?
Well, think about a major school of Hindu philosophy like Advaita Vedanta. Its ultimate view of reality is very different from that of, say, modern physics.
How so?
Science EMP, our modern science, tries to understand how the universe evolves over time through natural causes, physical laws, material interactions.
Cause and effect, empirical observation.
But Advaita Vedanta ultimately views the entire physical cosmos, all its processes, everything we experience, as Maya, an illusion, a temporary, ultimately unreal appearance arising from the one true reality, which is Brahman, eternal, unchanging consciousness.
Okay, so if the whole physical world is basically an illusion, Maya, then why spend time building incredibly complex, mercury-powered, heat-absorbing flying machines to navigate it? Isn't there a fundamental conflict there?
Exactly. There's an ontological tension. If physical reality is ultimately illusory and transient, then trying to understand its workings empirically, trying to manipulate it with technology, it could seem pointless, maybe even a distraction from seeking the true, non-material reality of Brahman.
So how do proponents of science VED deal with that?
Often by emphasizing the primacy of spiritual perception, of inner realization. Look at Swami Vivekananda, a key figure in modern Hinduism. He cited the ancient sage Patanjali on evolution.
What did he say?
Vivekananda claimed the real secret of evolution wasn't external struggle, like Darwin's sexual selection or survival of the fittest. It was the manifestation of the perfection which is already in every being, and unfolding from within. He saw that as a superior, more profound concept than materialist explanations.
Inner potential unfolding rather than external pressures shaping things.
Right. And you see a similar critique of purely material science from someone like A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of ISKCON, the Hare Krishna movement.
What was his take?
He consistently criticized Western materialistic science, even when it made big discoveries like finding antiparticles in physics. He argued it fundamentally failed
Failed how?
because it provided zero understanding of the inner self, of consciousness, of our relationship with the divine, which for him was Krishna consciousness. That knowledge, he argued, was infinitely superior.
So for these thinkers, modern science might reach the stars, but it can't reach the soul. It lacks a moral or spiritual compass.
That's a good way to put it. They saw science EMP as inherently flawed because it tries to separate the observer from the observed, the scientist from the spirit, which leads, they'd argue, to a fragmented understanding and potentially dangerous, morally blind applications of technology, like atomic bombs, perhaps.
Okay, but despite this philosophical gap, there's still this push, especially today, to prove the Vimana texts empirically, right? To build one based on the descriptions.
Absolutely. Which brings us back to those modern replication attempts, specifically the story of Shivkur Bapuju Tulpa.
Telpe, late 19th, early 20th century. What's the story there?
Well, the sources we consulted state he conducted a successful trial of Vimana called the Marutsa Ko, based entirely, supposedly, on the ancient writings he studied.
A successful trial. What does that mean? Does it fly?
The claims are pretty extraordinary. Reportedly, yes. It was launched, achieved a claimed velocity of around 40,000 kilometers per hour.
40,000 kilometers per hour. That's incredibly fast. Mach 30 plus. And landed safely.
And landed safely. That's the claim presented in the sources.
Okay, we definitely need that critical distance here again. While the sources report a successful trial, is there solid, independent, verifiable proof of that flight, that speed, the anti-gravity mechanism, from a strict science EMP standpoint?
That's where it gets murky. Comprehensive, independently verified documentation from that time. It's generally considered lacking by mainstream historians of science and technology. The details are debated, partly because of the era and the lack of formal institutional records compared to, say, the Wright brothers.
Right. So we should frame Talpade's work less as definitive proof and more as what? An early attempt by someone using science EMP methods to try and validate science VED knowledge.
Exactly. It's part of this ongoing effort. And apparently, it's not just history. The sources note that current research is still looking at the Murtsaka Vimana writings,
For what purpose?
investigating the principles for potential real-world applications today, especially, it seems, for military UAVs, unmanned drones, and MAVs, micro-air vehicles.
So the concepts in these texts, however old or controversial, are still seen as potentially scientifically interesting, maybe even useful for modern technology.
It appears so, viable enough at least to warrant continued investigation, according to these sources. #tag outro.
Wow, okay. We started this deep dive talking about mythological chariots in the sky.
Yeah.
And we ended up dissecting things like the 16 steps for purifying mercury for potential ion engines and descriptions of nuclear fallout symptoms in the Mahabharata.
It's quite the journey through these texts.
It really is. We've seen this, well, this shocking correlation maybe between the engineering details claims for Vimanas and the effects of modern atomic physics. It's hard to just brush it off as pure coincidence, isn't it?
It certainly challenges easy explanations. These sources, taken together, they really compel us to at least reconsider the standard timeline of technological progress.
You mean it's not just a straight line, always upwards?
Maybe not. The narrative suggested here is that scientific knowledge might be cyclical, not linear. That profound understanding of anti-gravity, complex metallurgy, maybe even nuclear forces could have existed thousands of years ago.
But within a completely different framework, a spiritual, holistic one.
Exactly, which challenges that neat line we like to draw between science on one side and religion or spirituality on the other. Maybe that division wasn't always so clear-cut.
And as we wrap up, let's circle back to that really profound political or maybe moral point we touched on earlier.
About Ashoka.
Yeah. The sources suggest this advanced Rama empire destroyed itself with its own incredible weapons. And King Ashoka, supposedly knowing this history, witnessing the horror described in texts like the Mahabharata, He makes a conscious choice to conceal that knowledge.
To bury the secrets of those futuristic weapons.
So the provocative thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on is this. If that account holds any truth, if advanced civilizations can self-destruct, and if we find ourselves today with technology capable of ending the world, what does it mean that an ancient ruler might have chosen deliberate ignorance or concealment as a form of planetary self-preservation?
It throws the idea of relentless progress into question, doesn't it? It raises this deeply uncomfortable question about moral responsibility. When our technological power reaches the point where it threatens our very existence, maybe the most scientific or wisest decision isn't always to push forward. Maybe sometimes it's to pause, or even to limit access.
A balance between seeking knowledge and understanding the ethical implications, which perhaps was a key idea in Science VED that maybe Science EMP is still struggling to integrate.
Perhaps. It suggests that true wisdom requires both understanding the how and the why, and maybe even the when not to.
Indeed. Something to think about. We encourage you to dive deeper into these fascinating and often bewildering sources yourself. Thank you for joining us on the Deep Dive. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going on, well, a pretty epic journey. You've sent us stuff covering millennia. We're talking the Eurasian steppes way back in prehistory, remote Pacific islands in the 20th century.
And then somehow ending up looking at outer space. It's quite a spread.
It really is. Ancient texts, dense anthropology, even critiques of modern space policy. It's a lot.
Right, and today our goal isn't, just summarizing. It's finding this one thread, this one big idea that ties everything together. We're taking that popular ancient astronaut idea, aliens visiting Earth in the past.
Yeah, the whole chariots of the gods thing.
Exactly. And we're challenging it. We're suggesting that maybe these amazing, mysterious stories aren't about literal ETs. Maybe they're echoes of something deeply human. The shock, the trauma, when one culture slams into another that has way, way more advanced technology.
So we're using this anthropological idea, the cargo cult, as our main tool to understand these myths.
That's the plan, using cargo cults as the key.
Okay, so let's start where most people encounter this stuff. Pop culture, right? The ancient astronaut hypothesis, AAH. It's everywhere. You can't really escape it thanks to shows and figures like Giorgio Tsoukalos with the hair.
Right, him and Eric von Daniken before him, they've made this a huge phenomenon. And you have to admit, the evidence they point to, it can feel really persuasive at first glance.
It really can.
The basic AAH idea is pretty straightforward. Ancient people saw technology they couldn't possibly understand, spaceships, advanced tools, whatever, and recorded them the only way they could, as gods, angels, miracles, divine chariots.
And some of those source texts are incredibly vivid. Take the Ramayana, the Hindu epic. You send sources focusing on Book 6, Canto CX3 and CXV. They describe this flying machine, the Pushpak.
Oh yeah, the Pushpak Vimana.
It's called wondrous, wrought by hands divine. And it's not just flying. It's wafting passengers swiftly through the air, decorated with swans' silver wings, controlled by thought or divine will, not by, wind.
It reads like a blueprint for some kind of amazing personal aircraft, doesn't it? Very specific functions defying known physics of that era.
Totally. But maybe even more famous, certainly in the West, and more. Mechanically suggestive is Ezekiel's vision in the Bible.
Ezekiel's wheel. Yes, that's probably the #1 exhibit for AAH proponents.
Right, because the description is so nuts. He sees this fire, and inside, 4 living creatures. Human-like bodies, but 4 faces, 4 wings, legs like polished bronze, straight legs.
Gleaming, yeah, like burnished bronze. But then the wheels.
Yeah, the wheels. It's this complex thing, a wheel intersecting a wheel, sparkling like topaz, and the rims are high and awesome, and this is the weird bit, full of eyes.
And the movement. They move without turning. Whichever way the creatures faced, the wheels went straight ahead. They rose when the creatures rose.
It's that precision, the metallic description, the interlocking parts, the weird movement. I mean, your modern brain immediately jumps to technology, right?
Absolutely. Gyroscopes, landing gear, some kind of omnidirectional propulsion. It is genuinely difficult to read that passage today and not see some kind of machine. The specificity is just uncanny.
It feels like he saw something mechanical, something constructed, but, and this is the big but, academia just doesn't buy it, does it?
Not in the literal alien sense, no. Your sources are crystal clear on this. Mainstream archaeology and science classify AAH as pseudoscience, sometimes pseudo-archaeology.
And there's that link to historical negationism, too. The idea that, Ancient Egyptians couldn't possibly have built the pyramids themselves. It must have been aliens. It kind of strips agency from past cultures.
Exactly. That's a major critique. So the scientific consensus is pretty firm. The literal interpretation, aliens landing spaceships, is out. But what we're doing today is different. We accept the power of that imagery, that feeling of seeing something utterly baffling and advanced. And we're asking, what if that feeling, that technological shock, is the real story? What if these myths are the fossilized records of humans encountering other humans with vastly superior technology and trying to make sense of that huge destabilizing gap?
So we're keeping the shock, but swapping the alien visitor for maybe a different group of humans with, say, metal tools when you only have stone.
Precisely. We're shifting the focus from who they saw to how they reacted. And that reaction, that way of processing overwhelming technological superiority, that brings us straight to the cargo cult.
All right, let's unpack that. The cargo cult.
Okay, so to understand how this might apply to ancient myths, we first need to understand the cargo cult phenomenon itself. Where does the term even come from?
It's mostly associated with the South Pacific, right? Melanesia, places like New Guinea, Vanuatu, emerging especially around World War II.
Exactly. That's the classic context. You had these relatively isolated, often small-scale societies, many operating with Neolithic-level technology stone tools, subsistence farming, or fishing.
And then suddenly, boom, World War II happens. The Japanese arrive, then the Americans, the Australians.
And with them comes this unimaginable flood of material wealth. The cargo, jeeps, radios, airplanes landing on hastily built strips, canned food, cigarettes, medicine, prefabricated buildings, just mountains of stuff appearing as if by magic.
Magic from their perspective, anyway. They wouldn't understand the global industrial complex behind it all.
Not at all. The sheer scale and sophistication were completely outside their experience. And this created a massive psychological impact. These cargo cults typically spring up in these situations, an abrupt, overwhelming encounter with a vastly more complex, technologically advanced culture.
And it shook their whole worldview.
Fundamentally, their traditional beliefs, their understanding of how the world worked, their own status and power, it was all thrown into question. Why did these outsiders have so much amazing stuff while they had comparatively little? It caused what anthropologists call cognitive dissonance, a real social crisis.
So how did they respond? What do they do?
Well, they observed. They saw these foreigners, soldiers, administrators doing strange things, marching in formation, raising flags, talking into boxes.
Saluting, wearing uniforms, things that seemed maybe ritualistic.
Exactly. Ritualistic and, crucially, effective. Because after these actions, the planes landed, the ships arrived, bringing more cargo. The islanders didn't see the factories in Detroit or the supply lines across the Pacific. They saw the local rituals and the arrival of goods, and they connected the two.
Ah, so they started imitating those rituals.
Precisely. That's the hallmark of a cargo cult. Ritualistic imitation. They'd clear strips of land in the jungle to look like airstrips, light signal fires or torches along them. They'd build mock control towers out of bamboo, sometimes even wooden replicas of airplanes or radios.
Wow. So they're performing the actions they associate with the arrival of cargo, hoping to make it happen again.
Yes, but the meaning is shifted. It's not about logistics for them. It's about sacred ritual. It's performing the perceived magic that summons the wealth. These were often led by charismatic prophets who promised the return of the cargo if people followed the new rituals, sometimes combined with rejecting the ways of the colonial powers or missionaries.
Can you give an example?
The most famous is probably the John Frum cult on Tanna Island in Vanuatu. Still active today, actually. John Frum appeared, supposedly, around the 1930s, maybe as an American serviceman, maybe a spirit. He prophesied that if the people rejected European ways and went back to tradition, custom, he'd return with shiploads and planeloads of cargo.
And people believed him.
Thousands did. It became a powerful unifying force, a way to resist colonial influence, too. And that faith is incredibly persistent. There's a great story where a skeptic challenged Chief Isaac, a leader of the cult, years later, asking why the cargo hadn't come after decades of waiting.
What did he say?
Chief Isaac apparently replied, "You Christians have been waiting 2,000 years for Jesus to return to Earth, and you haven't given up hope."
Wow. That really puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's about faith and hope in the face of something overwhelming.
It absolutely is. And it shows these aren't just naive misunderstandings. They can be sophisticated responses to cultural disruption, even forms of political resistance, like the Johnson cult in New Hanover, Papua New Guinea, back in the 60s.
Named after President Lyndon B. Johnson.
Yeah. People raised money and held ceremonies believing LBJ would come and essentially liberate them from Australian colonial rule. It wasn't necessarily that they expected him to literally show up and be their king.
More like he represented this powerful external force that could validate their desire for change. A symbol.
Exactly, a mythological figure to rally around, providing a framework to critique and reject the current oppressive system. They needed that superhuman intervention narrative.
So it's not just about wanting stuff. Your sources frame it as a kind of social technology. The rituals themselves help manage anxiety, create community.
Absolutely. In times of intense stress, war, colonization, disaster, these shared symbolic actions forge collective identity. They provide comfort, order, and a shared explanation, however flawed. When the old world shatters, it's psychologically vital.
It's like that impulse is hardwired. Imitate what works, even if you don't know why it works.
It seems to be. We even see it today, right? That term cargo cult programming in software development.
Yeah, where coders copy blocks of code that seem to work without really understanding the underlying logic just because it worked elsewhere.
It's the same fundamental psychological mechanism. See success, imitate the pattern, hope for the same result. It shows how basic this response is when facing something complex and superior.
Okay, so that's the cargo cult model. Imitation born from technological shock and status anxiety, creating new rituals and myths. Now, how do we apply that to ancient history?
Right.
Right, this is the big leap, isn't it? We're taking this model from 20th century islands and applying it potentially thousands of years earlier to the formation of the Proto-Indo-European speakers, the PIE culture on the Pontic-Caspian steppes. We're talking, what, 5,000 to 3,000 BC?
Yeah, roughly in that ballpark. And the hypothesis presented in the sources is that this period, the very formation of PIE culture, was itself a crisis point triggered by a similar kind of cultural and technological clash.
A clash between who?
Between the existing semi-nomadic hunter-gatherers of the steppes and incoming settled agriculturalists, likely of Afro-Asian origin, sometimes linked to the Near East or Anatolia.
Okay, so the farmers are the ones with the cargo in this scenario. What
Yeah.
made them technologically superior? What was their cargo?
Several key things, according to the sources. Critically, they had advanced knowledge of agriculture and especially large-scale stock breeding. Domesticated cattle, sheep, goats. They also had more permanent house-building techniques and potentially early copper metallurgy.
So consistent food surplus, better tools, more stable settlements compared to the steppe hunters.
Exactly. For the hunter-gatherers, this would have looked like an almost supernatural mastery over nature, an abundance of food and resources that seemed effortless compared to the hunt.
And who are the specific hunter groups that felt this impact most acutely?
The sources pinpoint groups like the Dnieper Rapids hunters. What's interesting about them is that, thanks to very effective fishing, they'd already established more permanent sedentary settlements than typical hunter-gatherers.
Ah, so they weren't constantly moving.
Right. And crucially, archaeological evidence suggests they already had some level of social differentiation. Status differences were emerging. This made them, as the sources put it, status sensitive.
Meaning they were already tuned in to hierarchy and who had more cool stuff, basically.
Pretty much. They were psychologically primed to notice the farmer's apparent wealth and success, and likely felt what the sources term neighborly envy. They wanted to figure out how to get in on that action, how to align themselves with this superior system.
So the farmers seemed like lords of the animals, possessing almost magical power. And the hunters felt inferior.
That's the core idea. Just like the Pacific Islanders watching the U.S. Navy, the steppe hunters felt a profound sense of cultural and technological inferiority. This spurred innovation, but through that cargo cult lens.
Meaning they started imitating the farmers' practices.
Yes, clusters of innovators emerged among the hunters. They began adopting things like making specific types of pottery associated with feasting, and crucially, the practice of stock breeding. But, and this is key for the cargo cult interpretation, these weren't initially adopted purely for, say, daily food.
Ah, so it wasn't just, oh great, more reliable meat.
Not primarily, no. The initial adoption seems to have been heavily weighted towards sacral status-marking significance. Owning cattle, for instance, became a powerful symbol of wealth, prestige, and ritual power long before cattle became the main source of everyday calories for the entire population.
It was about performing the ritual of success associated with the farmers. Owning the cargo animal conferred status.
Precisely. It was a way to ritually participate in the perceived power of the farming culture, and we might even have linguistic footprints of this shock.
How so? Borrowed words.
Potentially, yes. Deep linguistic analysis suggests that some fundamental PIE words related to stock breeding might actually be loan words borrowed from Afro-Asian languages, the languages potentially spoken by those incoming farmers.
Like which words?
Well, the PIE root, often reconstructed as Seth, meaning bull or perhaps large domestic animal, shows similarities to Semitic words for bull, like Hebrew shor or Arabic thar. And similarly, the PIE word for cow, adou, might also have Afro-Asian cognates or origins. If the very words for these key animals were borrowed, it strongly suggests the concept and the animal itself were introduced from an external dominant culture.
That fits perfectly. If cattle were the ultimate cargo, the symbol of this new power, it makes sense you'd borrow the name along with the animal and the ritual practices.
It could explain why cattle held such an unusually sacred status in many archaic Indo-European traditions, why there were often taboos against killing them, except for very important ritual feasts. It wasn't just about food, it was a lingering echo of their original status as symbols of almost supernatural power.
Okay, the cattle were the cargo. The hunters imitated the practices, borrowed the words. How does this whole shock and imitation dynamic feed into their foundational myths? Specifically, that core PIE creation myth.
Right, the big one, the cosmogonic myth. We reconstruct it as involving three key figures: Manu, meaning man or human, his twin brother, Emo, twin, and a primordial bull, linked to that root steer we just discussed.
And the basic story is,
Manu sacrifices his twin, Emo, and also sacrifices the bull. From Emo's dismembered body, the different parts of the physical world and the classes of human society are created. From the bull's body, all the useful plants and domesticated animals originate.
a pretty brutal creation story. Dismemberment and sacrifice creating the world. How does the cargo cult crisis change how we read that?
During that initial crisis period, what the sources call the pre-Proto-Indo-European PPIE stage, the original cargo semantics of this myth would have been radically different from its later interpretations. It was likely revolutionary, even compensatory.
Compensatory how?
The act of slaughtering and dismembering the twin, Emo, and the bull probably represented a symbolic rejection and destruction of the old social order that was failing, the one thrown into crisis by the farmers. Proto-Manu, the sacrificer, represents the hunter, but now as the positive hero, the innovator, the leader embracing the new way forward.
And Emo, the twin who gets killed. Who does he represent in this original cargo meaning?
He's the negative figure, the one who has to be overcome. He could represent the foreign farmers themselves, possessing the cargo, but needing to be ritually defeated in the myth to assert the hunter's agency. Or, perhaps more intriguingly, Emo could represent the hunter's own outdated elite, the old shamanic leaders, whose power base was undermined by the farmer's obvious success. The myth justifies replacing them.
So the myth essentially says, our ancestor Manu killed his twin, representing the old ways or the foreign power, and the bull, the ultimate cargo symbol, and from that act we created the true world and society. Kind of rewrites history to put the hunters back in control, mythologically speaking.
Exactly. It compensates for their real-world inferiority by making the ancestors of both groups twin brothers, implying original equality, but having the hunter figure, Manu, be the ultimate victor and creator. The sheer violence of the myth, the fragmentation reflects the intensity of the social crisis and the radical break required.
That's a powerful political statement embedded in a creation story. So it started as revolutionary justification for change.
Yes. While the PIE groups were still forming, still in that crisis mode, the myth served that purpose. But once the society stabilized, once they fully integrated stock breeding and metallurgy, and crucially, once they developed their own distinct social structure, the meaning shifted again.
This is where the big man system comes in.
Precisely. As PIE society stabilized and stratified, likely organized around these big men, powerful leaders whose status depended on accumulating wealth, like cattle and followers, the myth lost its original revolutionary cargo cultic edge.
It got repurposed.
Completely. It was reinterpreted to become the foundational charter myth, justifying the new stratified social hierarchy. The dismemberment of Emo wasn't about revolution anymore. It was now read as the act that literally created the different social classes. Priests from the head, warriors from the arms, commoners from the legs, something like that. Variations exist across IE traditions.
So Manu transforms from the innovative hunter leader into the archetype of the priest king, the H1 Erg, the ruler who embodies both sacred and worldly power at the top of this new hierarchy.
Exactly. The myth, born from the trauma of cultural collision and status anxiety, became the ultimate ideological tool to legitimize the very social inequality that arose from that collision. Okay, so we've seen how the initial cargo cult shock might have birthed PIE culture and its foundational myth. Now let's look at the social system that emerged from that, the established, stratified big man system, because the internal tensions within the system fuel a whole other set of recurring myths across Indo-European cultures.
You're talking about the witch war theme.
Exactly. The constant battle between the established elite and some kind of powerful, often female sorceress figure leading the marginalized. To understand that, we need to quickly recap the structure of that archaic PIE big man society.
Right, so at the top you have the ruler, the H1 Urga.
Mm-hmm.
Not always a hereditary king, right? More like a powerful leader whose position depends on performance.
Yes, his power is personal. It hinges on his ability to acquire resources, cattle, loot, land, and crucially, to distribute them generously to his key followers, his primary clients.
And these clients are the elite.
They are. The H2R. These are the warriors, the poets who sing his praises, maybe early priests. They form an exclusive, tight-knit group, often described as a Männerbund, a warrior brotherhood.
A men's club, basically.
Pretty much. And this elite develops a very specific worldview, what the sources call a cosmology of success. What matters most is achieving victory, gaining honor, maintaining status. Shame for failure is the ultimate negative, more so than, say, abstract moral sin. It's pragmatic, results-oriented.
Okay, so you've got this exclusive, male-dominated elite focused on honor and success. Who gets left out? Who's on the margins of this system?
Well, obviously the commoners, farmers, laborers, people without strong ties to the big man. They're often vulnerable, perhaps rootless, and significantly women. The formal power structures, the Männerbund, explicitly excluded them.
So if a woman was ambitious or wanted to wield influence,
She couldn't operate within the official public power structure of the warrior elite. She'd have to work through other means, non-publicly, perhaps through kinship networks, maybe using knowledge considered special or hidden, what the sources call shadow networks.
and how would the male elite perceive that kind of non-public alternative power?
They'd likely see it as inherently suspicious,
I see.
secretive, manipulative, maybe even magical or sorcerous. It's behavior that's non-manly, operating outside the rules of open combat and honor that define their own status. It's subversive by its very nature in that system.
Ah, so the ambitious or powerful woman automatically gets stereotyped as a witch, a sorceress, a threat to the established order.
Precisely. She becomes the archetypal witch figure in the mythology generated by this social system. And she's often depicted as the leader or champion of the other marginalized group, the commoners, the baseborn, the disenfranchised masses who might be drawn to alternative, perhaps millennialist, movements promising change.
So the witch war myths are basically allegories for the inherent conflict between the ruling, androcentric warrior elite and everyone else pushed to the fringes.
That's the interpretation, yes. These myths reflect that constant social tension. Let's look at some examples your sources highlighted, starting with the Norse tradition.
Okay. The war between the two groups of gods, the Aesir and the Vanir, and this figure, Golveig, or Hyr.
Right. This story reads like an attempt by the Aesir, who represent that primary masculine warrior elite, to purge a dangerous influence. They capture the witch, Hyr, who seems to be another name for Golveig, associated with gold and perhaps disruptive magic, and they try to burn her.
3 times, right?
3 times they burn her, and 3 times she is reborn or resurrected. That regeneration is absolutely key. It symbolizes the seemingly inexhaustible nature of the threat she represents, perhaps the resilience of the common people or alternative beliefs.
And her people, the Vanir, how are they depicted?
In the Aesir-centric narrative, like the Poetic Edda, the Vanir are often portrayed negatively. They're described as the Ilrar Ujohar, the wicked or baseborn folk. Numerous, powerful in their own way, especially through magic, like Freyja's Seir or their specific war magic, Vigspa. They actually defeat the Aesir in the initial conflict, partly due to this regenerative power and magical prowess.
So it's the elite trying a witch cleansing, but it backfires because the witch and her baseborn followers just keep coming back. It mirrors that fear of popular uprising or alternative power structures.
Exactly. Now shift to the Indo-Aryan context. The eternal war between the Devas, the gods equivalent to Aesir elite, and the Asuras, the demons often representing chaos or anti-order.
And the witch figure here is?
Kavya Mata, the mother of Sukra, the guru of the Asuras. In one key myth, the Devas are losing badly, even with the help of the powerful god Vien. Why? Because Kavyamata intervenes.
Yeah, with magic.
Yes. She uses her immense tapas, her ascetic power, a kind of magical force to completely paralyze Indra, the king of the gods, and even Vishnu himself. It's a direct assault using non-martial power that bypasses the god's warrior strength.
Undermining the elite's primary mode of power. And is there regeneration here too?
Absolutely. Vishnu eventually manages to kill her, but her son, or sometimes her father, Brigu, instantly resurrects her using special knowledge. Her ability to return from death provides this continuous, cohesive, morale-boosting force for the Asura army. Again, the message is that the threat represented by the witch is persistent and regenerative.
It just won't stay dead.
Okay, what about the Slavic examples?
We see similar patterns. Figures like Jezebaba, often conflated with Baba Yaga, though complex. In some folktales, she leads a supernatural army against the hero. The hero, often a seemingly lowly figure like Popelvar, Cinderlad, struggles because her warriors keep regenerating.
He can't just win by fighting. No, the key is often to bypass the army and confront Jezebaba directly at the source of the regeneration. In some versions, she's literally sitting in her hut on chicken legs, weaving her warriors into existence from threads. It emphasizes that domestic, hidden, continuous source of power.
That's a great image. Weaving warriors.
Isn't it? And then you have the Russian Bylina tradition, the epic poems. Here, the heroes, the bogatirs, the ultimate warrior elite fight against the invading Mongol hordes. But the hordes are often led or empowered by a supernatural female figure, like the she-demon Krivda, which means falsehood or injustice.
And her warriors?
They resurrect immediately after being killed. The bogatirs, despite their immense strength, are overwhelmed and demoralized. They have to retreat and seek supernatural aid, often from saints like George the Valiant, because their earthly prowess isn't enough against this endlessly regenerating, demonically led force.
So across Norse, Indic, and Slavic traditions, you have this recurring structure. The established male warrior elite facing off against a powerful female sorcerer who leads or empowers the marginalized other, and whose key strength is regeneration, making the conflict seemingly endless.
That's the pattern the sources identify. These witch war myths aren't just random monster stories. They're argued to be deep, symbolic reflections of the inherent social stresses within that post-cargo cult, stratified big man society. They're the elite's nightmare. The rebellion of the excluded, led by a figure whose power they can't control through normal means, and which just keeps coming back.
Okay, this has been an incredible arc. We started with flying chariots and Ezekiel's wheels, potentially misinterpreted technology. We saw how that shock might have created a cargo cult dynamic in PIE prehistory, shaping creation myths, then how the resulting social structure generated its own myths about witch wars. Now, let's bring it right up to the present. How does this cargo cult lens apply to something thoroughly modern, like SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence?
Well, the sources you provided level a pretty strong critique here. They argue that SETI, or at least a significant part of the thinking behind SETI, especially its more optimistic strands, exhibits its own form of cargo cult mentality.
How so? Are they building mock radio telescopes out of bamboo?
Not quite literally, but the argument is that the underlying assumptions about progress in extraterrestrial civilizations are rooted in some, frankly, outdated 19th century ideas. Specifically, ideas about linear cultural evolution.
You mean like that old ladder of progress idea? Savagery, barbarism, civilization?
Exactly. The sources point specifically to Lewis Henry Morgan, the 19th century anthropologist. His work was hugely influential, even though it's now seen as simplistic and, well, racist. He created this typology where societies progress step by step, based largely on technology.
So mastering the bow and arrow moves you up a rung, pottery another rung, iron tools another?
Right. And the pinnacle, civilization, was defined by things like the phonetic alphabet and writing, which, surprise, surprise, basically described 19th century Europe and America. The key assumption baked into this was that technological progress automatically equaled moral and social progress. More advanced tech meant a more ethical, stable society.
Okay, I see where this is going. The critique is that SETI scientists are kind of unconsciously importing that old assumption.
That's the argument. Many involved in SETI, often coming from physics or astronomy backgrounds, tend to operate within this implicit framework. That any civilization advanced enough to develop interstellar communication or travel must have also solved its internal problems. They must be peaceful, cooperative, maybe even altruistic.
The Star Trek future, essentially.
Precisely. Gene Roddenberry's vision is often cited as shaping this social imaginary, as the sources call it. Roddenberry said things like, "We're still just a child creature. When we grow up, man, we're really going to be something." It's this idea that civilizations mature like individuals, inevitably outgrowing violence and conflict.
So, the assumption is that the ultimate cargo advanced alien technology or contact will automatically come bundled with enlightenment and peace.
Yes, and that's where the cargo cult analogy bites. Just like the islanders assumed the rituals brought the goods without understanding the industrial system, this view assumes advanced technology necessitates advanced ethics without necessarily having evidence for that link. We're projecting our hopes for a peaceful future onto hypothetical aliens.
But this optimism isn't just wishful thinking, is it? It has real-world consequences for SETI itself.
Absolutely. It functions in part as an ideological justification for the field, especially projects involving active SETI deliberately sending powerful messages out into the cosmos to attract attention.
Meaty messaging, extraterrestrial intelligence.
Right. If you assume advanced aliens are likely to be benevolent cosmic elders, then reaching out seems like a great idea. Why wouldn't you want to make contact? It minimizes the perceived risk.
But it creates a massive ethical blind spot if that core assumption is wrong.
Exactly. What's the actual data point we have from Earth's history? The sources are blunt about this.
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. Contact between human groups with vastly different technology levels.
Yeah.
It almost always goes badly for the less advanced group. Colonization, exploitation, destruction.
That's our only empirical data. Yet the optimistic SETI narrative often downplays this potential downside. The risk that ET might be indifferent, exploitative, or actively hostile that they might show up to, as one source colorfully puts it, eat our brains, is often treated as science fiction paranoia, not a serious risk factor to be weighed scientifically and politically.
It really does sound like the Johnson cult again, doesn't it? Hoping this powerful external figure, LBJ or the benevolent alien, will arrive and solve all our problems, letting us off the hook for solving them ourselves.
It's structurally very similar, projecting our desire for progress and peace onto the other. Technical specialists might focus purely on the signal detecting it, decoding it, assuming that contact means collaboration, scientist to scientist.
They're focused on the technical cargo.
Right. But they overlook the immediate human geopolitical reality. The instant a credible signal is detected or even rumored, the first reaction isn't likely to be global scientific cooperation. It's going to be national interest, secrecy, competition.
Who controls the message? Who gets the perceived technological advantage? That could trigger conflict before we even know what the message says.
Precisely. The sources warn that the perception of one nation gaining an edge from contact could lead to diplomatic crises, espionage, even cyber attacks on observatories. Our inherited big man system instincts, competition, status, control would likely kick in immediately. This isn't fundamentally an astronomy problem. It's a geopolitical one.
So the conclusion here is a call for, what? More caution.
A different approach.
Definitely caution,
Yeah.
and a broadening of the conversation. The sources argue strongly that planning for first contact, if it ever happens, shouldn't be left solely to the astronomers and engineers who might be unconsciously trapped in that optimistic, tech-focused cargo cult mindset.
It needs to involve other experts. Yes. Diplomats, anthropologists, historians, social scientists, risk assessment experts, people who understand human history, power dynamics, and the complexities of intercultural contact. We need robust, internationally agreed-upon protocols developed with input from governments and the public, not just a small group of scientists.
Basically, we need to move beyond the Star Trek imaginary and confront the possibility that highly advanced doesn't necessarily mean highly moral.
Exactly. Our own history shows that technological leaps like the atomic bomb drastically increase the capacity for violence, not necessarily the wisdom to avoid it. The cargo cult lesson, whether ancient or modern, is a warning. Beware of projecting your own hopes onto superior power. Assume they might be just as flawed, or perhaps just as indifferent, as we are.
Wow. Okay, let's try to wrap this up. We have covered an immense amount of ground in this deep dive, from Ezekiel's wheels in the pushbox Imana.
Which we reframed not as literal alien craft, but perhaps as early records of profound technological shock.
Right. To the birth of Proto-Indo-European culture itself, possibly triggered by a prehistoric cargo cult dynamic between hunters and farmers, embedding itself even in their creation myths.
Yeah, turning a revolutionary myth into a justification for social hierarchy.
And then seeing how that hierarchy generated its own myths, these recurring witch wars, reflecting the tension between the elite and the marginalized.
All the way to modern SETI, where the same kind of hopeful, perhaps naive projection onto superior technological power the aliens will be peaceful idea might be shaping our approach to the cosmos.
The common thread through all of it seems to be this idea of cargo, whether it's actual physical goods like cattle and copper, or something more abstract like advanced knowledge or radio signals from space.
Exactly. The encounter with and the desire for superior cargo, whatever form it takes, seems to be a fundamental driver of human mythology, social change, and anxiety. These stories, ancient or modern, aren't just entertainment. They're deep reflections of our social structures, our power struggles, our deepest fears and hopes when facing the unknown or the overwhelmingly superior.
The myths about gods or aliens, they really are mirrors showing us ourselves, aren't they? Especially those moments of crisis when our world gets turned upside down by something we can't explain.
They absolutely are. Which leads us, I think, to the final thought we want to leave you with today.
Go for it.
If our analysis holds any water, if our most ancient foundational myths, the stories that literally define the origins of Western civilization, might actually be relics of a prehistoric technological shock, a cargo cult moment, then how might our newest grand narrative, our modern fascination with finding ET, be similarly shaping us right now? How are the assumptions we make about aliens, the hopes we project onto them, already influencing our global politics, our anxieties, our own sense of progress, even before we get a single confirmed signal?
So the search itself is shaping us, regardless of whether we find anything.
Maybe. Perhaps the biggest discovery SETI will ever lead us to isn't an alien message, but a deeper understanding of ourselves, the power and the potential pitfalls of our own very human, very persistent cargo cult way of thinking about progress in the universe.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a stack of sources that challenge, well, pretty much everything you think you know about celestial beings. If I asked you, the listener, right now, to picture an angel, what do you see? You probably see a figure that is serene, maybe beautiful flowing robes,